We're ready. Chair Martinez.
Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to our November 6th meeting. And we will begin today's meeting by honoring our flag with the Pledge of Allegiance. You all stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, if we could have the TV coverage announcement, please.
Good morning. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcasts of the Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on the CSB TV Channel 20. This hearing will also be streamed live on CSB TV and digitally archived. And then could I proceed with roll call?
Please do.
Commissioner Reed?
Here.
Commissioner Bradley?
Here.
Commissioner Cooney?
Here.
Commissioner Park?
Here.
Chair Martinez?
Here. Okay, so let's go on to the agenda status report. Yep.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. In regards to the status of our agenda today, we have 3 items on our standard agenda. We have the fire suppression water tank, then we have the continuance of the YMCA alteration to hours project, and then we also have cannabis ordinance amendments that was continued from a prior hearing to today. Staff's ready to present on all those items today.
Okay. Any comments or? Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Your light's on, Commissioner Parks, so that's why I'm looking at you. Okay, there we go. Projection report.
Chair and Commissioners, looking at the projection report. Our next hearing will be here in Santa Barbara on November 13th. We have an appeal of a cannabis cultivation project in Carpinteria on that day, and then we have the outdoor lighting and sign ordinance amendments scheduled for that day. Again, November 13th here in Santa Barbara. And then moving into December, we have on December 4th 3 items on that date. An appeal of an Laguna Blanco access easement and grading project in the Hope Ranch area. And then we have a government consistency, and then we have an ordinance package that includes ordinance amendments to Senate Bill 9, telecom ordinance amendments, and then just regular minor ordinance amendments that will be presented on December 4th. And that will be here in Santa Barbara as well. Then we will return or go back to Santa Maria on December 11th. There's 3 items on that date. There will be a report on the Strauss Wind Energy Project and their adaptive management plan. We continue the appeal of the Sentinel Peak Resources Truck Project to that date. And then we have emergency shelter zoning ordinance scheduled for that day. Again, that's December 11th in Santa Maria. And that will conclude this year of hearings. And then we have already January 8th, we've placed a project, which is a equestrian project in Ballard Canyon on January 8th. So that concludes this year, and we're already moving into next year. And we'll be publishing the dates for the hearings next year in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. And do any commissioners have any questions, concerns? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to the public comment. And this is a period in time in which the public has the ability to comment for 3 minutes of their own choosing in regards to matters which are not on today's agenda. I do not have any speaker slips, so I will ask if there's anyone online that's going to be public comment.
If you're online, raise your hand or dial *6 to tell me if you called in. We do not have any public online.
Okay, so then we'll go into Planning Commissioners' informational reports. If anyone has any information from the commissioners. Well, seeing none, Then we'll go into the minutes for October 9th. And what I'm looking for is a motion to approve or comments regarding the proposed minutes. Commissioner Cooney
I'll move approval of the minutes of October 9, 2024.
and Commissioner Briley.
I'll second, but I had one question on item 8, the minutes. I know Commissioner Martinez, or Chair Martinez, was this the one where you came in and you started and then you left and then you returned? Or did you come in late and you weren't there for that item? Just the beginning of the admin agenda? Do we remember?
Are you talking about for the minutes, the approval?
Yeah.
I believe that
Were you-
was a meeting that I was not at, and that's why I abstained from voting for the approval of the minutes for September 25th.
Okay, but you were here present for the minutes action?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then my second stands, no corrections. Thank you.
All right, so I'll just ask, any other comments? Not seeing none, I just ask for a verbal vote by the commissioners. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any abstain? Any nays? Okay, so those are approved. So now we will go to the director's report.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I have some things to report from the Board of Supervisors. Yesterday, the board took action on the mobile home park temporary urgency ordinance that will be in effect for 45 days, and then we will continue it on December 10th, and that gives the county about 10 months to process the overlay that will protect the senior mobile home parks. And then we'll also be taking action to further protect some of the mobile home parks that are not currently zoned for mobile home parks. They have some of their underlying zoning to maintain those without some kind of legislative action in their current use, with the thinking that those housing types provide some level of affordable housing ranging from low income to even upper moderate income. The board, this was not a county planning commission item, but it was a Montecito planning commission item, but you may have some interest in it. The Music Academy of the West appeal was heard by the board yesterday. The board denied the appeal and approved the modifications to the CUP. And then we had the hearing on the agricultural element. And I wanted to go over a couple of things that came out of that hearing. It was continued to December 10th because it was late in the day by the time we got to that item, and there were a number of things that the board wanted to think about and maybe modify. So what I wanted to share with you was some of the comments that we heard from the board. There was an interest in increasing the owner-provided camp facilities, whether they be Airstreams or something like that, from 60% to 80%. There was a question about, and we spent a good deal of time talking about this, and I know a couple of the planning commissioners had questions about this, that the Ag Preserve Advisory Committee had a separate series of recommendations from the Planning Commission. And so we talked a good deal about that. The Ag Preserve Advisory Committee reports directly to the board on changes to the uniform rules. They do not report to the Planning Commission. So we had two sets of separate recommendations that we needed to forward to the board for their consideration. In general, the board favored the Planning Commission's recommendations. There is one item that we're looking at, and that has to do with small campgrounds. The recommendation that was made by the APAC for contracted lands was really derived from a mitigation measure in the EIR. So we're looking at how much flexibility there is to increase the size of the area of disturbance on contracted lands. So that was one of the things that we talked about kind of in great deal. There was an interest in providing for a minor CUP for larger farm stays, 9 to 15 units. And there was an interest in increasing setbacks, particularly from the 4th District, on composting facilities so that it protected surrounding agricultural crops. There was an interest in, we had these provisions about setbacks and that the department could consider neighborhood agreements as a way to reduce setbacks down to 100 feet. The board is interested in maybe reducing that down to 50 if there's a neighbor agreement. There was an interest in increasing the number of campsites that are allowed on some of the parcels. So the 4th District expressed this interest. It wasn't clear whether the rest of the board wants it, but we'll be bringing it back. And that is on parcels that are 100 acres to 200 acres, they could have 20 campsites. And then on parcels 200 to 320, they could have 25 campsites. And then, of course, above 320 is 30 campsites, which is what the Planning Commission recommended. There were some questions about the overlay. There are a couple of individuals that have come forward seeking to be removed from the overlay. A couple of properties near Gary, which are sort of on the edge of the overlay. And then the Cottonwood Winery is seeking to be removed. Now that, if we just took that out, that would be like a donut hole, and we aren't going to recommend that. So we're going to be looking at what it would take to carve that out in a logical boundary. The Cottonwood Winery. The board wasn't sure they were going to go for that, but they want us to look at it. I think the parcels adjacent to Gary are easy enough to carve out, and that will probably be done, but it still remains a question when we move west if there are going to be any carve-outs there. There's some concern, and this really is coming from the 3rd District, and I think some of the other board members are in agreement that this is a big step that the board is taking and that the county is taking in terms of loosening up what can happen on properties in the agricultural area. And there's a little bit of concern about exemptions and being unable to track them. So we are looking at creating something like an annual, or it could be every 3 years, it could be every year, it depends on what the board would be interested in, where they would just report on the kind of activities that they're going to carry out in that year. And that way there's some kind of communication. The county has an idea about what's going to be happening on properties. They have their exemption. They can either get an exemption, they can pay for an exemption, or they don't need to. But there would just be a way for us to transmit user-friendly information for them about the kinds of setbacks and the hours of operation and that type of thing, and a way for the county to kind of monitor where these things are happening so that we could be in a better position to assess if they're having impacts on the community over the long haul. And then there was also interest in having some kind of ability to revoke zoning clearances if we have bad actors. And we currently already have that ability in our code. But they wanted to clarify that if there were individuals out there taking advantage of the AEO and they were not following the guidelines and the standards that are in the code, that we would go ahead and revoke their land use clearance or zoning clearance, or if they had a land use permit. We can't do that with exemptions, and then they would have to wait a year before they could apply again. So that would be the disincentive for them to not follow they want disincentive to not follow the code. There's concern and they want to really have some kind of tool to ensure that people do. And there was a proposal where we have an Ag 2 property that is completely surrounded by Ag 1 properties. that when they do campgrounds, they would get a CUP because they're surrounded by other properties that are, that while they're agriculture, they're sort of a different type of agriculture, smaller in nature. So I think that really covers what we talked about with the board. We're going to be doing some work between now and the 10th to bring back these options to them, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I have a question or two.
Commissioner Reed?
Okay, first, at one point, I watched the whole thing, but at one point during the hearing, there appeared to, a question emerge with respect to, the APAC recommendations and Williamson Act, protected properties, whether the Williamson Act properties would be able to participate fully in the AEO. In other words, would the full participation in the AEO be limited to, the 36% or so of properties that are non-Williamson Act? How was that resolved?
So the question came about in discussion about these separate recommendations, but the Ag Enterprise Ordinance applies everywhere.
Okay.
So, but we do, about 64% or 65% of the land in the county zoned for Ag 2 is in contract.
Right.
So the way it's crafted now, based on the APAC's recommendations, there would be some additional restrictions on contracted lands, which is not unusual. That's how the program is constructed now. If you enter into contract, you can't do everything that somebody else can do that's not in contract. And that's in exchange, obviously, for the tax breaks.
Okay, second item, this is just an observation with respect to the composting discussion.
Yeah.
I suspect that perhaps not every supervisor is fully conversant with the different types of composting, whether it's plowing something under which is technically composting, but they may assume that it's all traditional green and brown vegetable material and wood composting. But I think they need to understand also that some sorts of composting are like City of Santa Maria, where they'll introduce meat, biological materials that are not part of traditional composting. I think they might benefit by hearing that defined, particularly when they're entering into a discussion of what sorts of setbacks they want to incorporate.
Commissioner Reed, through the chair, that is a very good observation. I think we were going to have to do some more education, even in our presentation about composting and what vegetative composting is versus the type of composting where they do bring in animal product into it. Because I think there's a lot less concern about if you're just taking, vegetation waste, whether it's hedges or clippings or turning a crop under. That's a really different type of composting. So it's a very good point. We'll make sure to clarify all of that for the board.
Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Director, having gone through a couple of APAC hearings recently, the big issue seemed to be coverage, and it's a big concern for them, that there be adequate opportunity for the row crops or whatever the purpose may be. Did anyone from APAC participate in the hearing?
Commissioner Cooney, through the chair, they did not. David Lackey, our staff, who is the supervising planner on this, actually sits on the APAC, but he's not the chair of the APAC. So the chair did not come, and they were not represented in any way other than us forwarding the recommendations that they made to the board. This is interesting because 2 hearings ago, there were a series of cancellations on contracts, and the board asked some pointed questions about it because there's a concern out there that there are people taking advantage of the tax breaks but actually not complying with their contract. So they're not meeting the contract requirements. And the APAC typically gives those in agriculture many opportunities to come into compliance, but then they will move forward with a cancellation of the contract. So the board had some interest in that because they don't want people taking advantage of the tax breaks if they're not going to follow the rules of the contract. and keep the land in an active, the right level of active agriculture. Non-prime contracts are much easier, but prime contracts are harder because you have to have, they tend to be on smaller properties, and so you have to have at least 50% of your premise in that active agriculture. And so we're seeing some situations where there are cases that they're not meeting that requirement.
There is a lot of complication in terms of ag preserve cancellations and getting the ag preserve designation in the first place. And while we were spending significant time on the ordinance, at least I was oblivious to the interaction with the Ag Preserve Advisory Committee. So I can see there's an opportunity here to pull all that together, but it will require time on everybody's part in P&D.
Yeah, and there was a request that came from the 3rd District the staff at one point did present what the APAC's recommendations were, but I don't think it was clear enough to the commission that they would be separately transmitted. So if that came as a surprise, my apologies, that should have been more clearly expressed. But the 3rd District asked, is there a way for us to bring the two recommendations together, the two bodies together, to try and get that aligned a little better in the future? And I have to think about how we are going to do that, because you do have two bodies that are both reporting to the board separately. But there's surely a way for us to coordinate a little better and make sure that everybody has all of the information available.
Yeah, I did not mean to imply that we were underinformed.
Oh.
I just personally was not taking into account this great body of law for ag preserves, and a lot of it's state directed, and so it should be coordinated, and I'm sure that if it comes back to the Planning Commission, it would be just to approve proposed action, or maybe it doesn't come back to us. But in any event, I think it's good that it's all surfaced so we can get it straightened out now as opposed to in the courts or someplace else. Thank you.
Commissioner Park?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, I want to say I'm very impressed to hear all these details of things that people are thinking about, the board's talking about. It shows they got into it, so to speak, and they have a lot of thoughtful ideas. So that's good. Okay. I'm just curious about the public comment. How big was it? Was it
It was
3 or
wide.
4 or 30 or?
It was, I think, it was late. I was tired, but
Yeah.
I think it was about 4 or 5. Oh, really? Yeah,
Okay.
not much.
Not much.
Not much public comment. Maybe because it was late, it was 6 o'clock or something like that by the time we got to public comment. But there wasn't even a lot of speaker slips submitted early in the day, which conveys to me that the Planning Commission did a lot of really good work in terms of the number of hearings you had and the way you discussed the issues. There wasn't a lot of concern being expressed.
Well, we worked everything out, really.
You
mean,
did a really good job.
That's why I think it was that. So I was curious
Yeah.
about that. I want to address two other things. On Cottonwood, I'd like to talk to somebody about that because, I toured that area with Commissioner Reed, and we had some thoughts as we were drawing the final overlays. And it's a tricky one, but the reason I'd like to be involved a little bit more on it is the topography there can lend itself to drawing a sort of a peninsula, so to speak, to leave that property out of the overlay, and for a reason other than that they just don't want to be there. It basically, Commissioner Reed, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it's in a ravine, so to speak, a valley. So you have the flat farmland, but then you have this ravine, and ravines aren't just holes; they're drainages that connect to something else. So one could kind of take that drainage and redraw the overlay and make it work in in a logical matter, so it doesn't look like some kind of a spot zoning thing. Okay, that's that. This thing about the APAC and its recommendations, I know that for some of the proponents of the ordinance and property owners, there was some anger about that. And there was with some of the members of the Board of Supervisors. And I hate to see that, because this ordinance was important on its own right, but it was also important for a bigger picture, because it was sort of a indicator of a culture change in our planning process, frankly, including all of us, that seemed more inclusive to North County people and to ag people. So we don't want to undermine that. Now, you know, so I think we should have further discussion of how to involve APAC. I'm a little uncomfortable, frankly, that the main staff person we're dealing with is also APAC. It's like several hats, and that's not such a good idea. If we can figure out a way to avoid that situation, it would be good. But we've also had a fair amount of experience just in recent months with working with other county bodies and having that convergence you speak of before we went to the board. We just had that on the Miramar and MPC. You know, we worked in as best we could, MPC involvement and recommendations. And of course, we had AAC, the Ag Advisory Committee, throughout on the AEO. So it's not impossible to do that. We just kind of have to put on our thinking caps. So, but all in all, I'm glad to hear what you reported. Thank you.
Yeah. I appreciate your comments, and we'll make sure to involve you in on the Cottonwood along with Commissioner Reed. The one difference about the APAC from the MPC and from the AAC is that they go straight to the board. Our codes specifically outline that MPC would make a recommendation to the PC, and the AAC just makes recommendations as well or writes letters. So it's just a little bit different. That's just a clarification. That is not to say we can't figure out a way to have a better integration, but I just it was a process that's already set in place where whenever we change the uniform rules, those recommendations do come directly to the board from the APAC. I just want to clarify that.
But that's why I want separate people wearing the different hats, so that we
It's
don't have
tricky.
an APC member
Yeah.
being our main staff person developing the ordinance. And then this, I wondered why during the ordinance, sometimes I'd see things that would pop up in some of the changes that they weren't even instructed by the commission or even appearing in staff reports. But when I would read the draft ordinance, I'd see things for the first time. And I don't want to think that it was there because somebody's on APC and putting in their own considerations.
Oh, yeah, I don't
So
think that.
I don't
that's
want
not the
this
case.
multiple hats thing. We need to
Yeah.
deal with that.
Commissioner Reed, you had,
Two last comments. One, with respect to the public comment, I think there were 4 or 5. Most of them were from real stakeholders. Anna Citron, Dennis Bazanich, Mary Hayden, I forget her name, the lady from We Watch.
Oh, yes,
But
Nancy Emerson.
some, Anna Citron and Dennis Bazanich, they gave some particular thanks and praise to Commissioner Park and I for some of our efforts during it. Mary Hayden was full of praise for Commissioner Park and the 5 years or so of work he did on it. Most people were complimentary. Little requirement. Dennis Bazanich had a couple of interesting comments about the potential for doing economic studies and later, making sure it's linked to the increased potential from the REC master plan. So all in all, very positive and very appreciative of the work of the commission. One last question, though. At one point during the conversation, there appeared a table, kind of a hybrid table, bridging the recommendations of APAC and the Planning Commission. I'd just like to know what the genesis of that, when, how, and by whom was it created?
So we, Commissioner Reed through the chair, we had a meeting with the 4th District, and there were a number of questions about how we might be able to bring the APAC recommendations more in line with the Planning Commission's recommendations. And with all of them except the small-scale campgrounds, the board can easily transition to the PC recommendations. It was the small-scale campgrounds where the APAC's requirements and the PC's requirements were different. And we had a mitigation measure in the EIR that was in between those two, right? That had it was slightly smaller than what the PC recommended, particularly for the smaller sites, and slightly bigger than what the APAC recommended. And so what we did for the 4th District was we drafted a change that would be more in alignment with the mitigation measure, because we only had one mitigation measure to preserve agriculture, to help protect agriculture. And it was somewhat fell in between those two recommendations. And so we developed that because we knew he was going to have a question about it. And so we shared that with the rest of the board as an option.
I'm glad they're working toward that to preserve the economic opportunities, which were the basis for the whole AEO. I don't think anyone wants to see those choked out of it.
Right.
So thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions on that?
Commissioner Bradley?
Sorry, several people, Commissioner Park and staff said something about this late hit, if you will, from the Ag Advisory Commission, and I heard about it from a couple people on that commission and farmers. Was it just because they came up with something sort of in the last month before it got to the board, or because I felt like we did really good work with them, and we had, 2 or 3 meetings with them here as a joint meeting, bless their heart.
So this is Ag Preserve
Oh, Ag
Advisory
Preserve,
Committee.
okay.
Yeah.
As per AAC.
Yeah, which
okay.
is a body that's staffed by the different departments in the county.
Okay, my
It's
mistake.
chaired by the Ag Commissioner's Office, and it deals just with contracts.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And my only comment really in regards to that is that I think that what we did was a good thing for the economic activities for those with the Ag 2 lands. However, it's a choice ultimately, because some of these things you may have an advisory as to the Agricultural Preserve Act, Williamson Act, but the Board of Equalization has a lot to say about that. And a lot of it comes from the solar, when some people just put a little patch on their ag land, and there's some decisions regarding that, and it had an impact upon the Williamson Act. But that's just my comment. And then in regards to Cottonwood, that's kind of I know that property very well, but I thought they were predominantly strawberry farm land, but no matter what. Okay, so let's go into our.
Oh, I have a few more things to report.
Okay.
Sorry. The upcoming, I wanted to let the Planning Commission of the Board has added a hearing in December, the 17th of December, because they've got so many items coming at the end of the year. And so the Ag Enterprise Ordinance is going to go back on December 10th, along with our extension of the mobile home park moratorium urgency ordinance. And I wanted to let you know that we have the HLAC nomination of 2929 East Valley Road on the 10th, and SB 35 Coastal Zoning Ordinance Amendment on the 10th. The Blanco appeal. I wanted to touch base on the cannabis ordinance amendment. I know you're hearing that today, but that is not scheduled to go to the board before the end of the year. That will, we were unsure how many hearings the Planning Commission might have on it, and we have very, very full agendas at the board level all the way through. And they had their last hearing for November yesterday, and they'll have 3 hearings in December, but we will not be moving the cannabis ordinance forward this calendar year. And I think that's it.
All right. Okay, then we'll be moving into our standard agenda, but before we move into our standard agenda, I want to make this announcement. I'll make it at every single time before we bring something up. If you want to speak on an item, the time to raise your hand online and to turn in your slips for speaking on that item, you have to do that, raise your hand before staff finishes their presentation. Once they finish the presentation, that's it. That includes those who want to speak here and they're present. You turn in your speaker slip before staff finishes their presentation. Great. Okay? Now, we'll go into the first item, if we can, please.
The following is a hearing on the request of Whitney Colley, agent for the owner, to consider the following. Case number 24 DVP 0004, case number 24 CDP 00061, to determine the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to the state CEQA guidelines sections 15303 and 15311.
So, any ex parte communications? Let me ask that. Seeing none, we're going to go to staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. My name is Kevin De Los Santos, and I'm presenting the 3798 Via Real Fire Suppression Water Tank Project. The project site is located within the coastal zone and Toro Canyon Community Plan Area in Carpinteria and is zoned Ag 1. The project site is a permitted cannabis processing site operated by Coastal Blooms Nursery and is accessed off a private driveway off Via Real. Pursuant to the coastal zoning ordinance, approval of a development plan is required when development on site totals 20,000 square feet or more in the Ag 1 zone district. The project site is currently developed with a 1,226 square foot single family dwelling, a 14,500 square foot cannabis processing structure called out as Building A, and a 4,020 square foot cannabis processing structure called out as Building B. Building A is 25 feet tall and Building B is 24 feet tall. The total amount of existing development on site is 19,796 square feet. Building A must be fire sprinklered in order to meet current fire standards. The existing water line from Carpinteria Valley Water District does not have sufficient flow requirements for the required fire sprinklers in Building A. As a result, Carpinteria Summerlin Fire Protection District will allow the use of a fire suppression water tank to supply the fire sprinklers in Building A. The staff report stated that both Building A and Building A require the water tank, both Building A and Building B require the water tank to service fire sprinklers in each building. However, we recently learned that existing infrastructure is adequate to service fire sprinklers in Building B, and only Building A requires a proposed water tank to service its fire sprinklers. The proposed project is a request for construction of a 1,590 square foot fire suppression water tank and a 99 square foot fire pump enclosure to service fire sprinklers in Building A. The project will result in development on site totaling 21,485 square feet. As previously mentioned, a development plan is required when development on site totals 20,000 square feet or more. Therefore, this project requires approval of a development plan. The proposed tank will be 15 feet tall, and the fire pump enclosure will be 8 feet tall. The proposed development will be screened by landscaping, and the project was reviewed by SBAR. As discussed in the staff report, the project is consistent with all applicable policies of the comprehensive plan, including the coastal land use plan and Toro Canyon community plan. The project is a request for development of a water tank located on an Ag 1 zone lot. This is a permitted use of the zone. The project complies with all coastal zoning ordinance requirements, specifically the Ag 1 zone district, and the project can be found exempt through CEQA sections 15303 and 15311, which exempts construction of new minor accessory structures. Staff recommends that your commission take the following actions. Make the required findings for approval, including CEQA findings, determine that the project is exempt from CEQA, and approve the project, subject to the conditions included as Attachment B. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Mr. Briley.
Thank you, Mr. De Los Santos. So the Planning Commission never saw this because it was below the DVP square footage, right? So this is the first time we're seeing it.
Correct.
Okay. And I was just confused about one thing in the staff report, and I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to talk to you about it beforehand, but at the bottom of page 3, you talk about, at the very end of that paragraph, you say the DVP will acknowledge all the existing permitted development, right? But then on the next page, you continue by saying existing permitted development is not subject to consistency analysis. So how is it that you acknowledge it, but it's not subject to findings? That's, maybe there's, help us out.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, the requirements for submittal of a DVP include documenting all existing uses and development on site. So as part of that development plan, we include and list all uses and development on site, and we list, what its setbacks or heights and development standards that it may or may not comply with. However, existing permitted development is not required to be found consistent or make the findings because it was already legally permitted.
That's really interesting, because when we went through all these appeals, and I know, and I got in lots of conversations with the members of the public saying, this is actually a good opportunity to actually bring all these non-conforming buildings that have been constructed over the last 30 years into compliance through the DVP or CUP process. So I thought we always caught it. We actually did as-built modifications or as-built allowances in the DVP or the CUP to make sure that everything's up to snuff and now legally conforming by virtue of the action. Does that make sense? But it sounds like here, that's not the case.
Commissioner, through the chair, I think that's what we're trying to do today with this development plan. So yes, there's existing permitted development on site, and then this new water tank exceeds the 20,000 square foot threshold, which requires a development plan. And development plans include all of the development on site. So we're simply saying that now there's a development plan for the entire property because of this new water tank, and all of the existing development is permitted, and it happens to still meet code requirements.
But then why is the Senate saying that it doesn't have to be consistent with policies or development standards?
Yeah, so I think one thing I wanted to say too, commissioners, is this is not about the use, right? The cannabis use is permitted in the greenhouses. The development plan is just talking about structural development on the property. So this kicks it over this 20,000 square foot threshold.
Right.
So this permit is in essence documenting the as-built of what is there. This all happens to be conforming with all of the development setbacks. And so if something was non-conforming or something, we probably would have addressed it with this, but this didn't happen in this permit.
So
Does that
there
make
was
sense?
something non-conforming, you just throw in a modification or some sort of thing to make it?
Yeah, or make
Oh,
them
okay.
cut it back or something
I
like
just want to double check.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Commissioner Reed.
I have just a short question. I noticed next to the tank you have what's variously referred to as a fire pump enclosure. When I go look at the little building, when I look at the site access plan, it says fire pump engine structure. Says that on that, but then when I turn to page 3 of the blueprints, I see a diagram, looks like an electric motor. So what's in there, electric motor or a diesel or natural gas fired pump? What runs the pump that's going to drive the fire suppression system?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I have to defer that question to the applicant team. It's been noted as a fire pump enclosure throughout the application process.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Koenig.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Los Santos, you mentioned that Building B would not be required to have this tank if it was the only building. My question is the plan to hook up the fire suppression system in Building B to the tank in spite of the fact it wouldn't be required?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, no. So the water line from Carpinteria Valley Water District can support fire sprinklers in Building B, but it cannot support Building A as well. So that's what the water tank is for, is to support the fire sprinklers in Building A.
So the Building A operations are entirely dependent on the tank, and nothing else is on the property. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, yes, that is correct. The tank is strictly for supporting fire sprinklers in Building A.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm just going to follow up on this then. But Building B does have fire suppression already then?
Correct. Mr. Chair and Commissioners, yes, the Building B does have fire sprinklers, and the water line can support those fire sprinklers in Building B.
Thank you. Okay. Seeing no other ones, then the agent, I don't know if the agent wanted to speak or not. Whitney Colley? You don't have to, but if you want to. Okay, that's what I thought. I thought I saw this. So please announce your name when you speak, and this is a small project, so let's so 5 minutes at most, okay?
I have a presentation
Okay,
I submitted.
it's yours.
Sure. Can you go to the first slide, please? Yeah. Yeah, can you go to the? No. There you go. Good morning, Chair Martinez and Commissioners. My name is Whitney Colley. I am the Vice President of Compliance at Coastal Blooms Nursery, which is the owner and operator of this project site. With me today is Philip Green, our company's president. This site has been previously permitted for cannabis operations, and through this DVP before you today, we are proposing to add a fire suppression tank. Next slide, please. The site was permitted in May of 2021 under 20 CDP 87 to process and distribute cannabis in 2 buildings previously built and permitted in 2000 as agricultural storage. One building, the small building, is 4,000 square feet, and the other large building is 14,500 square feet. Our company purchased this site in summer of 2020, and since then we have been working on getting the project's permits issued and signed off. Our business license was issued yesterday, and operations are due to begin in the next few weeks. There are both agriculture and fire water services on site along with a fire hydrant. Both buildings have upgraded fire sprinkler systems already installed. Next slide, please. In order to meet the fire water standards on site, we are proposing to install a 181,750 gallon water tank, which will provide the necessary water for the sprinkler system in the large building. Along with the tank, a pump to power the system is proposed, which will be housed in a 99 square foot structure. And to answer your question, Commissioner Reed, it is an electric pump. The existing fire water service will provide the water for the small buildings, sprinklers, and the fire hydrant. Next slide, please. Here's the project site plan, which shows all existing upgrades on site, the large and small buildings, buildings A and B, a residence, and a paved loading dock and parking areas. The proposed water tank and pump house are on the southwest corner of the 7-acre lot. Next slide, please. The landscape plan was approved as a part of the cannabis CDP, and all plants have been installed and are growing well on site. This is an interior lot. Via Real is over 700 feet away, and we expect this 15-foot tall green water tank to be fully shielded from public right-of-ways. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. Phil and I are here if anyone has any questions.
Mr. Briley.
Yeah, don't come back. Thank you so much for the permitting history. We always wonder after they, leave our hearing and you weren't here, how long it really takes to get going. And so this looks like it took a long time. Maybe staff can jump in too, but at some point, the water system wasn't going to work for both buildings, but that didn't get discovered until after the land use or the coastal development permit was issued and all appeal periods are gone. So were you trying to get final clearance from the district agencies before you could start production, and that's when this came up? I mean, how is it that it came up so late in the permitting?
So we've been working on it for a couple years. The fire water was discovered when working with CARP Water. So CARP, initially as part of the original CDP, CARP Water stated that there was enough water for the landscape plans. And then when we went back with the sprinkler upgrades were required as part of the fire department permitting, we discovered that the infrastructure on site was not enough. So the other option besides the tank was to upgrade the water line that runs under the 101. So that's not really feasible, which is why we ended up with this solution.
Okay, so it might have been, and you guys were in 2020, so that was sort of the beginning of the cannabis route. So maybe it was just the agencies weren't checking for full build out.
Yeah, so first we did the CDP, and then the building permit portion, we discovered the water issues.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Reed?
I just have one question. Have you ever considered the possibility or likelihood you might have a power outage and a fire at the same time? Is there a
There will be a backup generator on site.
capable of operating that? How many horsepower is that pump? Or how many amps it draw? The generator is capable of operating that pump? It
Yes.
has the capacity?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
My only question is in regards to this fire suppression tank, is it only going to be used for the fire suppression system?
Yes.
Okay. And I see no other questions. So back to staff? No? Okay, so I'll look for deliberations in regards to this matter.
Is there any public comment?
Well, that's true. I didn't see, well, no, because I don't have anything here and I don't have anybody on.
And we do not have any public comment.
Okay.
So
Commissioner
we're ready for deliberation?
Cooney? Yes.
That's a sensitive issue, as when we start deliberation. At the appropriate time, I'll make a motion to approve this project, and I'll read that into the record, but I would be interested in the thoughts of my fellow commissioners first.
Commissioner Reed?
Yeah, well, I would applaud the applicant's desire to install that tank to help suppress, the fire in the event of some, disaster or other thing happening on their property. We have a very large fire suppression tank and pump on one of our properties, and so I see no reason to deny this application. Well, I shouldn't be surprised that it's taken this long. I wish it was a more expeditious and quicker process, but I would fully support a motion to approve it.
Commissioner Park?
At the appropriate time, I will jump to second Commissioner Cooney's motion.
Okay. Well, I thought Commissioner Cooney was reserving his time to make that motion, but are you making that motion now, Commissioner Cooney?
Well, I'm interested if you or Commissioner Bridley have any comments first.
I concur with what I've heard. I support it.
Sure.
Okay, so the recommendations for this motion by staff are on page 2 of our staff report. The first is that we'll make the findings for approval of the project specified in Attachment A of the staff report, including the CEQA findings. 2, will determine the projects exempt from CEQA pursuant to state CEQA guidelines sections 15303 and 15311 of CEQA as set forth in the notice of exemption, which is part of our staff report, and that we approve the project case numbers 24 DVP 04 and 24 CDP 00061, subject to the conditions included as Attachment B1, Attachment B2, and we refer it back to the staff if the County Planning Commission takes any other action, which the motion should resolve.
Commissioner Park?
Well, that's so well stated, I'm persuaded to second the motion.
Okay. Any discussion? Any comments regarding the motion? Okay, so let's just have a quick roll call.
Commissioner Reed?
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley? Aye. Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Oh, Commissioner Park?
Aye.
And Chair Martinez?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Okay, so we have. Would you guys like to carry on or take a quick break? It's 10 o'clock. Let's just go forward to the next one. Okay, you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can announce the next item?
The following is the hearing on the request of Deanna Hardwood and Frank Bitts Appellants to consider case number 24 APL 00009, Hardware Pets, appeal of director's decision to approve amendment case number 23 AMD 0009, and to accept the previous mitigated negative declaration as adequate environment review for case number 23 AMD 00009 pursuant to section 15162 of state guidelines for implementation of California Environmental Quality Act.
Okay, and like I indicated originally at the beginning of today's standard agenda, if you are a member of the public who wishes to speak on this item, you have to have your hand up before staff finishes their presentation. And if you're here and you want to speak, you have to turn in a speaker slip before they finish the presentation. Staff. Well, let me ask, any ex parte communications? Commissioner Park.
You know, I've been asked by County Counsel Ms. Kim to make a special disclosure in ex parte communication, and I'm blaming it on her because I don't want you all to think that that's a sort of trend I'm starting towards long-winded disclosures of the ex partes. But Ms. Kim has brought my attention to 2 letters from the same individual in Solvang on this matter, and her reading of the letters is that they are asking me to recuse myself because I allegedly wrote the adaptive management plan that you'll be seeing today. And in fact, letter number 2 says that it was crafted in part with the assistance of Commissioner Park. And I'm not going to recuse myself. I wouldn't even if I had crafted it, but I didn't craft it. That's a falsehood. And I won't accuse the writer of libel because it doesn't injure my reputation. But it is something that Ms. Kim has asked me to explain. I have had no ex parte contacts whatsoever with the YMCA since prior to the first hearing, or with anyone with respect to the crafting of the adaptive management plan. Mr. Kringle has been persistently and diplomatically trying to attract my attention to this. And I finally was able to meet with him Friday afternoon after the Miramar case with him and Mr. Sewards. And they showed me a document they had. I didn't even have time to read it, but they explained it to me, and I thought, oh, it sounds good. And Mr. Reed was with us and had read it before and had some questions. But it's solely the product of staff, as far as I know, unless somebody else wrote it and gave it to you. But it really had nothing to do with me. In fact, I've never read it.
Okay.
I'll stop.
Full stop. Okay. Commissioner Bradley.
Oh,
Okay. No other ex parte communications to be disclosed, so let's move on to staff. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Soren Kringle. I'm the planner for the YMCA Alterations to Hours project and the subsequent appeal. Just to review and summarize the project before you, it is a request to allow for qualifying patrons, those that sign the 24-hour access agreement provided by the YMCA, to allow them 24-hour access to the exercise room, which is shown here, and to close off the northern portion of the parking lot between the hours of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m., except to allow emergency or service vehicles. Since the project was last at the Planning Commission, staff has worked with the YMCA to prepare an adaptive management plan to be implemented if severe or life-threatening incidents occur at the facility as a result of the extended and unstaffed hours. The adaptive management plan identifies 3 incident levels based on their nature and severity. A level 1 incident is defined as a life-threatening injury or death due to documented severe criminal activities during unstaffed hours directly related to the extended hour offering that is subject of this permit. Level 2 incidents include but are not limited to documented serious criminal activities like burglary, trespassing resulting in serious property damage, and illegal drug use during unstaffed hours directly related to the extended hour offering that is the subject of this permit. And level 3 incidents involve the violation of permitting conditions and will be managed through typical permit compliance procedures. If a level 1 incident occurs, the YMCA has 48 hours to report this incident to P&D compliance monitoring staff. And more than one level 1 incident within a calendar year will result in the YMCA being required to implement one or more of the response measures that are shown on this slide. Additionally, the YMCA will be required to provide P&D compliance monitoring staff with quarterly reports detailing the number of level 2 incidents that have occurred within that time period. And greater than 5 level 2 incidents within a quarter will result in the applicant implementing one or more of the following response measures. Furthermore, exceeding 10 level 2 incidents within a calendar year will result in the applicant implementing one or more of the following response measures. As stated earlier, level 3 incidents are those incidents that relate to the project being out of compliance with their approved permit, and this includes not closing the northern parking lot gate during the required hours or having non-compliant lighting on the property. Finally, if the YMCA does not meet any of the level 1 or 2 thresholds mentioned earlier for a period of 3 years from the date of zoning clearance issuance, the adaptive management plan will cease. And if the commission agrees with staff's recommendation, we request that you deny the appeal, make the required findings for approval as specified in updated attachment A, determine the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to state CEQA guidelines section 15162, and grant de novo approval of case number 23 AMD 9. This concludes my presentation. Myself and the applicant are here for questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Reed?
Mr. Kringle, first, thank you very much for adopting my change, which is to change the reporting level from level 1 incidents from 2 to 1. But then just kind of for the benefit of everyone here, could you describe the exact process you used or P&D used to create this management plan? Who participated, what the process was?
Commissioner Reed, through the chair. We modeled this adaptive management plan after other adaptive management plans that are already in use in the county, specifically the Strauss Wind Energy Adaptive Management Plan. Obviously very different projects, but that plan identified 3 levels of incident levels and identified appropriate response measures for each. So we felt that it adequately addressed this project and what was requested.
Okay, and the we, that refers to whom?
Myself, my supervisor, my division chief, I think that, and you're right, and county council.
Okay, thank you.
There was one statement on page 5 of your PowerPoint, which was review with local law enforcement. This is for level 2 reporting and response, and potential drive-by support. What does that mean? That the applicant would ask an off-duty CHP person or ask the sheriff to do drive-by supports for a period of time, or what does that mean?
Commissioner Bradley, through the chair, I think that's probably better answered by the applicants. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the last bullet on that.
Was it this one?
It's page 5. Potential drive-by support. That doesn't mean In-N-Out burgers provided to the guests.
Commissioner Bradley, let me look at this. I think they would meet with law enforcement who would then offer potentially like doing, random or periodic drive-bys to make sure that nothing's happening. That's how I would interpret that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. My quick question is that, so, and page A, I want to make sure I understand this one correctly. So if there's no reporting of level 1 or level 2 incidents for 3 years, then the monitoring stops, correct?
Chair Martinez, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
No, I do have one more question. Sorry about that.
Okay, Commissioner Wiley?
I'm familiar with lots of conditional use permits in the county from the 90s and early 2000s where there's a permit compliance program for almost any CUP, and this is really just an extension of that for this case, right? So even if there's a case that doesn't have something called an adaptive management plan, the permit compliance function as part of these discretionary permits carries forward on all cases, correct?
Commissioner Bradley, through the chair, yeah, for most cases, that's correct. If we apply we have a permit compliance condition that we apply to as a conditional of approval for projects, and then they have to open up a subsequent permit compliance case with us, and then we have a dedicated permit compliance staff that responds to complaints or any incidents if they're out of compliance with their permit.
So that will actually continue after the the third year of implementation of this. If there's no reports, and you're still going to have a permit compliance retainer for something that might happen in year 5, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Park?
Yes, following up on that, I heard the reference at, I guess it was the second hearing to, this was essentially a permit compliance matter. And I thought, well, in a way, because it struck me that permit compliance is that applicants agreed to do something, and then we have permit compliance because we want to make sure they do that. And in fact, my recollection from my glimpse of the actual plan you prepared, which is mostly embodied in your presentation, is the last paragraphs do in fact expressly state that the permit compliance is a separate matter and will continue on this. But it strikes me that adaptive management plan is addressing things that are outside of the control of the applicant. It's a big world we live in. There's changes and things that occur, and that if certain things happened and it created a problem, then that's what we would adapt to. And so I wanted to compliment you for making that distinction, but having all the appropriate language in the actual thing. Question for you, and it's one I asked you when we met. There's a reference to the P&D compliance monitoring staff, with capital letters. So it sounds like it's like an institution or something. Could you just elaborate? Is there such a thing for the benefit of the public that have concerns about this?
Commissioner Park, through the chair, yes, that there is permit compliance monitoring staff. They're under our enforcement division. I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, but it just shows that that's real. At the first hearing, we heard from former Sheriff Jim Thomas, at least through Zoom, that there hadn't been adequate notice to the public about this whole project. That was months ago. And then on the second hearing, right before the hearing, we received a letter from, I think it was the new superintendent of the San Ynez School District, who wanted to take a look at it and have it continued. And it was continued for various reasons. So it strikes me there's been plenty of opportunity for people to contact you. Has there been any further communication to you, Mr. Kringle, or P&D, of objections from the school district or concerns?
Commissioner Park, through the chair, no communications between me specifically or P&D specifically and the high school. I am aware that the YMCA has been in communication with them, and they have reached an agreement. And other than that, we have had some, yeah, that's the limits of communication that I've had.
Okay, well, thanks. I have no further questions.
Okay, seeing no further questions of staff. The applicant, is the applicant here today or wishes to state anything?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I believe it's appellant will go first and then the applicant.
Okay. The appellant. Okay. Okay, so let's give a timeline of 10 minutes at most. Thank you. If you could announce your name first. And you state your name first, yeah.
My name is Frank Dutch. one of the appellants in this case. Good morning, Commissioner Chair and other commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity once again for us to review this. I have reviewed the adaptive management plan. Feel like there's still some things that it doesn't really address to the extent we as a concern for the public and the members, and wanted to walk you through those. Before we start with that, I'm going to talk about the zoning again, the different levels that they've put inside there, their responses, and again, overall concern for the safety of the community. As we talked last time about the conditional use permit was actually put in place because the neighborhood was there first, and the zoning for where the YMCA is was residential. It was an E1 for 1 acre properties. And that entails what drove the conditional use permit and all the information that went into it to try to protect the noise, the lighting, the landscaping, and make it compatible with the rest of the community. Unfortunately, the zoning got changed in some history and went to a commercial zone, which it resides as now. But that's not really the topic today. It's just trying to emphasize the importance of what the previous landowners and those involved with the Y and the permitting held as a standard at that time. As we go through and talk about the level 3s, since our meeting, I guess it was the last meeting, there's been at least 2 infractions with regard to lighting and noise, and actually one last night that I hadn't filed yet with lighting again. So this continues to go on, even despite all these proceedings. And I'm fine, we'll continue to report these, but the likelihood of them, of the enforcement group showing up and seeing the lights on or hearing the noise is very unlikely. All they can do is take whatever evidence that we have to share with them, and then there's really nothing that says what's going to come as a result. You know, hey, stop doing that. You're outside your permit. We go to the level 2s and level 1s, and I'm surprised that kind of when we started this, what was being suggested is that this isn't going to happen. We're not going to have anybody injured. We're not going to have any attacks. And so what we've done is we said, well, okay, 4 or 5 may be okay. We're all right. If we have 5 a quarter, it's all right. And if we don't, then we're going to take the adaptive management plan away, and we won't be reporting these. We won't know what's going on. We already know that it is not rapid or actively reported throughout the industry when these events take place. So it's very concerning that now we're setting an acceptable level of what events can take place before action is really taken. Lastly, when we go and talk about the level 1s and we're going to have a phone number we call. We talked last time about, it wasn't clear in there who was going to be on the other end of that line. Is it going to be a central location within the U.S. or somebody locally? Now, the applicant did mention locally, but my next concern is that going to be the summer intern that's the lowest in seniority, or is it going to be somebody in leadership who's actually been through some sort of emergency management response training or some qualifications? That's not explicit as to who's going to be on that line. So what I'd like to do is, again, ask you to reconsider, while it is a step forward in an adaptive plan, I think it gives a very broad basis for action to really be taken when we already know that they have a proven record of not following up on what they've agreed to in the past. And I believe the reference to the farm, it's a wind farm project where they got these numbers. Is that in relation to bird strikes, not to humans? So with that, thank you for your consideration. If you've got questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.
I have some questions.
Thank you. And yes, Commissioner Park?
Yeah. It's good to see you again, and I appreciate your persistence in reasonably and respectfully making your comments. I think that's admirable. The reference to the wind farm, I'll answer that. That's as to how to do one of these documents, not the numbers.
Okay.
I have a question for you, though, about the lighting complaints you've mentioned. This is as the Y is operating now under its current hours and has really nothing to do with these expanded hours, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that's a concern you would have whether this project was approved or not, that the lighting complaints of yours about their program be considered and rectified. And I think that makes sense, and that's kind of part of the permit compliance monitoring that existed years ago when this was first approved and would continue in the future. I realize that there are certain thresholds for how many incidents before something happens. I'm kind of agnostic as to what those numbers are and was looking for guidance from other commissioners, but in particular members of the community, including you. Have you prepared any kind of memorandum where as opposed to coming here and criticizing what staff did, but just saying, here's what I think you ought to do. You have to have, one level 1 or 3 of them in so many months before this happens, and so many level 2s. Do you have something like that from you or your neighbors or the community?
No, sir, I do not have something like that.
Okay. Well, I only asked that because I think you're pretty good at that kind of thing, and I thought maybe you did, but that's okay.
Well,
Don't take it as a criticism.
In the first meeting, I had references that I'd pulled from incidents that had happened across the U.S., but we did dive into those given the time that we were given for that.
Sure.
But they were there for you, for others to look at, to see that this is a reality. It's not something we're making up.
Yeah. Well, thank you once again. I have no further questions.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. And then there's no other appellant, correct? You said appellants. Or is it applicant now? Okay, that's fine.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Ann Stifler. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the YMCA. Today I also have Catherine Thompson, the Executive Director from the YMCA, here with me as well. This October, we celebrated 35 years of serving the San Ynez Valley. It was a true celebration with some great special events, pumpkin pushes in the pool, community and member events. It was really exciting. We've worked hard before this day, and we will continue to work hard after this day to provide programs in youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. Our goal as a nonprofit charity is to serve the community and fill gaps in the community. Our application for this permit was to this aim. We submitted this application in August of 2023, and never did we expect to still be at it today, 15 months later. We've talked about some of the basics in this project, and I'd like to go back to them just for a minute. We've had a good track record of being good stewards. There are no violations on our CUP. This is a commercially zoned area. This is a busy corridor of town. This is a modification to indoor use only with no structural or lighting changes. This is in our current scope of services. There are already 24-hour operations in this area. The YMCA did not go into this lightly. Safety and service to the community is our priority. We have made modifications, and I think good modifications throughout this process in accordance with some of the desires of the appellants and some of the desires of the commission to try and meet to an agreeable outcome. And ultimately, this is a service to the community that many will benefit from. We realize that change is not easy, and it's easy to fear what you do not know. We understand the appellant's concerns and those voiced by the commission. We feel this adaptive management plan meets your standards and the concerns that were showed. This plan addresses the what-if scenarios voiced by the appellants and creates the call for accountability on the YMCA's end should they occur. I will address a couple of the questions that you had earlier or mentioned earlier. We did meet with the school district the day after the last hearing. The school district had been hearing some information about the project and honestly just wanted to know more. We provided the details, and I think they felt comfortable from there. In regard to a question Frank had about the calls will be answered by a YMCA staff who is local to this area. So that response can be given. Finally, I'd like to thank the county staff for all the support in this project. This is an unfamiliar territory for a YMCA to be delving into, and they've been extremely professional and supportive through this process, and we thank them. Any questions on my end?
Mr. Briley?
Thank you. So I'm assuming, and you may have stated it in a previous hearing, but you're pursuing this as an economic model to assist the YMCA in serving the community, but also in paying the bills, right? I was informed that there are several other facilities like this that are open 24/7. I'm not sure if they're in San Ynez or Buellton, but are you familiar with other similar operations?
Yeah, there are other wellness facilities in the county that operate 24 hours. We have a YMCA that operates 24 hours, soon to be a second YMCA in our area who operates 24 hours. So yes.
Where is the other YMCA that operates 24?
So we currently have one operating in Camarillo.
In Camarillo, okay. Are there, the 24-hour fitness facility, that's a 24-hour thing. So this is...
Yeah, there's Anytime Fitnesses around. There's 24-hour fitnesses around.
Okay. Does staff know of other ones nearby or within the 3rd District maybe?
Commissioner Bradley, through the chair, we noted some in the original staff report. There's at least one in Orchid. There's one in Buellton. I believe there's another in San Ynez as well. San Ynez Fit. Yeah, that's my recollection.
All right. Okay. That was my only question. Thank you.
Any other questions? There looks to be none. Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll go to anybody online.
Chair Martinez, we do not have any public comment.
Okay, and I have no slips in hand. So then we'll go back to staff.
Commissioners, Chair, we just have a quick comment that Commissioner Reed had asked that the language for the Tier 1 incidents be adjusted such that the threshold was 1 incident instead of 2. And staff is happy to, if that's the motion that the commission makes, is happy to make those changes in the action letter to reflect that language change.
Okay. Any questions for staff? Seeing none. Well, Commissioner Reed?
Oh, yeah, my logic in that is, since these are serious sorts of events, and in the original form, the first event would require no reporting. Then you have a second event. It would be a logical question from the victim or their family in the second event, why did the first event happen and nothing was done? Therefore, I think the threshold needed to move down to 1. Yeah.
Okay. No other. So then let's ask the appellant if he has anything further to add.
Good morning again. I'm Frank Betts, one of the appellates. Yes, I'd like to offer a rebuttal that I had done some research on the 24-hour operations, and none of them, there's one that's in San Ynez. It is a single person-owned facility. They do private work, and that's the only reason they say that it's 24-hour, because they are there the whole time providing constant training. Is more of a training facility, and they're called CrossFit. It's basically a little garage, storage room. And the other facilities are that may be around, they're 24, also are supervised. So the whole point early on in the very first proceeding was that this is not something that exists in Santa Barbara County. And I did follow up with the Orcutt one, and the Orcutt does have unsupervised, and so that one was one that I had missed in the original. I provided also documentation in the very first meeting that had pictures of the location in Camarillo. It's got a big sign in front of it that says Sports Park. And so it's got an Olympic-sized pool, it's got the YMCA, it's got baseball facilities and townhomes around it. So yes, it is in a neighborhood, but it's not in a single-family residential structure neighborhood. There are multiple structures. So I don't think it's a fair comparison, but that is the model that they're using. Any questions for me?
Yes.
Commissioner Park.
And Mr. Betts, there was one operating in downtown Solvang. That contradiction in terms, maybe, I don't know. Downtown Solvang, there was one that was operating that was unsupervised, and it was in an office building. Is that correct?
That is correct. That was in an industrial zone.
Well, or commercial, but it wasn't.
Well,
there's homes nearby, but not a strictly residential place. I
Yes, sir.
get it. And that one's not operating any longer.
I don't
is it?
think so.
Okay, thanks.
See no further questions. Thank you. And I don't know if the applicant has anything to add. I see nodding their head no. Okay. So let's go into deliberations. Anyone want to start? Well, I'll start then. I would just say that in regards to the accommodations that have gone from the beginning to now, I would be in support of the motion in regards to it. Commissioner Park. There was public comment already. Yeah, because I just went around again. Yeah. Commissioner Park?
Okay, so we've done public comment. I can
Yeah.
go into my thing. Okay. Yeah, this is in the 3rd District. A couple of observations. One, I am impressed with the engagement of board members for the Y in this process. That speaks well to the seriousness of the institution and their effort to truly understand what's going on. So I do appreciate that. We made it pretty clear, or at least I did, what I wanted after the first hearing. Made it even more clear after the second hearing that I wanted to see something. And for whatever process that's occurred, staff and the Y have come up with something that I think does as good a job as they could do. It's short, succinct, and it's meaningful. That delay, I know it tries the patience of proponents. It tries the patience of everyone. But I think it was actually good in this because there were some complaints. I'm not saying they were valid, but there were some complaints at our first hearing that the community didn't have notice of this, and didn't have an opportunity to register objections or suggestions. But now we're at the 3rd hearing after a couple of months, and it appears to me people have had every opportunity to be involved. And here we are today with no public comment whatsoever. So it appears that objections have either been redressed or they're not so serious that people want to keep raising them. So I am prepared to make a motion at the appropriate time to approve the project just as is, but with the one change that Commissioner Reed has suggested to reduce the threshold to 1 for level 1 incidents.
Commissioner Reed.
Hi. Okay, good. Yeah, I know this relationship between the Y and Mr. Betts and the other appellant has been going on for quite some time. We've received, a significant comment from both appellants and from the general public. I think for the most part, we've accommodated those needs and incorporated them into our instruction to the Y at the prior meeting to create and adopt an adaptive management plan that they have done, I think, to their best effort. So at this time, and I think it is the time, I would be prepared to second the motion from Commissioner Park.
Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to first indicate that to the appellant, Mr. Betts, and Ms. Harwood, that I well understand the reason that you came to the Planning Commission for relief of what was a disturbance to your daily lives in your own home areas. And I think we have all, or most of us, have had similar experiences in our neighborhoods. And sometimes you want to call for relief from a barking dog or a noisy party or too many lights on the outside. I live up in the hills, and it's very bothersome to have floodlights interfering with the dark skies. But these are issues faced by people trying to live together, and I'm sympathetic. I am pleased at the work that's been done by Commissioners Park, Reed, and by our staff especially, from whom I heard in a Zoom-type call yesterday, and I've thought about it. I think the process of what would happen if there is a violation is well laid out. If it turns out that there's a flaw that we haven't identified, our ears are open to hearing about it and coming back in some way. But for now, I support the plan that's been crafted and ask the neighbors to give it a chance to see if it cuts into the number of uncomfortable moments they experience. And staff took some extra time and effort to do this right. Whatever they used for a model, I think, is something we'll use for a model in the future. So I'm very pleased to see the reaction and the support staff has given to this neighborhood, not just to the appellants, but to the neighborhood. So I will support the motion. I think it's it's positive for all parties.
I'm happy to support it too. I just wanted to clarify the language change, the tiny language change, was that on condition 5 of the adaptive management plan about Commissioner Reed's adjustment? Can you just remind me where that is in the text?
Commissioner Barley, through the chair, let me put the slide up. So it's that second bullet point. More than one level 1 incident will be just changed to one level 1 incident within a calendar year will
Okay.
result.
All right, thank you. I'd be happy to support it.
Okay, so Commissioner Park, I think this would probably be the appropriate time for you to make that motion.
I will, but first I want to thank Commissioner Cooney for his comments. I enjoyed my meetings with Ms. Harwood and Mr. Betts, and I think they've spotlighted some important issues. I hope that we've responded to at least some of them. And I think that regardless of what occurs with this project, the bad pun here, but the spotlighting of the lighting problems, whether or not the project goes forward, is something that I hope the Y pays attention to, and we resolve that so we don't face this again. But on the motion, I will move that we adopt staff's recommendations stated in the staff report, with the one exception that the language referring to more than one level 1 incident be reduced to a threshold of one level 1 incident. That's my motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion, any comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, let's do a roll call.
Commissioner Reed?
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Park?
Aye.
And Chair Martinez?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you. And before we move on to our next item on our agenda, let's take a quick 10-minute break. Thank you. Okay, right. Good morning, and we're back in for our second session of this morning's meeting. And if you could please call the next item up, please.
The following is the hearing on the request of the County of Santa Barbara Planning and Development Department for the County Planning Commission to consider the following: an ordinance, case number 24-ORD-00012, and to determine the ordinance case 24-ORD-00012 is exempt from the provisions to CEQA pursuant to Section 15265 of the state guidelines for the implementation of CEQA.
Okay. And right now, we'll go straight to staff.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Commission. Today we are presenting amendments to the cannabis regulations in Article 2, the Coastal Zone. Planning and Development coordinated with the County Executive Office of April of this year to brief the board on the successes and challenges of cannabis odor abatement, compliance, and monitoring. During the hearing, P&D shared that the current ordinance provisions are unenforceable because there is no objective odor threshold, and the ordinance does not include tools to determine the odor source. P&D shared that the ordinance currently does not provide the tools to determine whether an operation is compliant with the requirement that odor shall not be experienced within residential zones. The board directed staff to amend the coastal zoning ordinance to develop a new objective odor threshold and standards to be used to verify compliance, determine where odor measurements should be taken and what tools should be used to measure odor, require quarterly inspections for the first year of operations and annual inspections thereafter, installation of runtime meters on odor abatement technology, and adopt a ministerial permit path for improvements to odor abatement plans. The board also directed P&D to study the power supply in the Carpinteria area and options for odor control for outdoor grows in the inland area. Before presenting the Article 2 ordinance amendments, here is background information on the existing cannabis sites in the coastal zone. This map shows all sites with an issued cannabis permit in the coastal zone. Sites consisting of mature and nursery cultivation, manufacturing, and processing are required to implement an OAP. This map shows cannabis odor complaint hotspots for complaints submitted in 2023. Under the existing ordinance, staff is currently unable to verify the source of nuisance odors when responding to complaints. This is due to challenges related to a broad array of factors, including proximity of cannabis operations, weather, topography, and limited descriptions in complaints. P&D received over 1,200 complaints in the Carpinteria area in 2021, roughly 1,000 in 2022, and roughly 400 in 2023. The decrease may be due to operators installing new or modified odor abatement technology, or members of the public may have stopped submitting complaints, or both. Complaints can be submitted at the Cannabis Complaint website by phone, email, or email to compliance staff. This is a map showing operational cannabis facilities in the Carpinteria area and specifies the type of each facility's odor abatement technologies. As you can see, the color-coded charts show whether a facility is utilizing carbon filters, photocatalytic oxidizers, and/or neutralizing misters. Sites that have a neutralizing mister installed are shown in red. Sites with carbon units installed are shown in green. Sites with photocatalytic oxidizers, abbreviated as PCO, are shown in blue, and sites with both carbon units and PCO are shown as purple. The single site shown in gray is currently not operating and does not have any technology installed. The sites with neutralizing misters, in addition to carbon units or PCO, are indicated with cross-hatching. The colorful dots are related to the odor study that will be explained in future slides. This is a close-up of the map showing operational cannabis facilities in the eastern Carpinteria area with current and proposed odor control technologies. The stars signify which operations are currently proposing improvements to their OAPs. For instance, the operation at Foothill and Casitas Pass is red on the left and green on the right because it is proposing to add carbon units along with the use of a neutralizing agent. The operation further east on Foothill is green on both sides and is indicated with a yellow star because it currently uses carbon units and is proposing additional carbon units and will continue with the use of a neutralizing agent. This is a close-up of the central Carpinteria area with current and proposed odor control technologies. As shown by the stars again, the operation off of Cravens Lane is proposing additional carbon units and will continue with the use of a neutralizing agent. The operation with the star off Foothill is green on the left and purple on the right because it is proposing to add PCO units along with the use of carbon units and a neutralizing agent. And this is a close-up of the western Carpinteria area. The operation with a star off of Foothill is proposing additional carbon units and will continue with the use of a neutralizing agent. This particular operation is currently operating under legal nonconforming status, and the application is currently pending on appeal with the Planning Commission. In November 2022, the board authorized a contract between the county and Geosyntec Consultants to provide cannabis odor monitoring for 3 years. P&D brought Geosyntec on board for technical support. They are assisting P&D with OAP inspections, and all active cannabis operations have been subject to at least one OAP inspection. During these inspections, Geosyntec reviews OAP compliance and helps document the presence of odor. Geosyntec reviews proposed changes to OAPs, and they also attend PC and board meetings to provide technical support. Per the board's direction, P&D's aim is to establish an objective threshold for cannabis odor and identify a method to detect odor using industry-accepted detection equipment. The new ordinance includes tools to enhance compliance efforts, including installation of runtime meters on OAP equipment, corrective actions if complaint thresholds are met, annual inspections, requiring maintenance documentation, and streamlining the process to improve OAPs without a new CDP. P&D staff engaged Geosyntec to help develop recommendations for the following. Number 1, an appropriate threshold value for measuring cannabis odors. 2, a method for staff to efficiently measure odor nuisance data. And 3, methods for staff to better utilize and respond to odor complaints. In support of the odor study, Geosyntec collected outdoor ambient air odor data in the Carpinteria area over 2 4-day periods. The first was in May, when the weather was foggy and cool, and the second was in August, when it was sunny and warm. Data was collected between 5 a.m. and 6 p.m. The intent of this approach, targeting 2 distinct weather patterns, was to understand meteorological factors that may influence the presence of nuisance odors. Locations of data collection were selected based on proximity to known odor complaint hotspots in order to be representative of odor complaints and the public odor experience. Data was collected in these areas from the right-of-way and at 3 select sites. Data was collected both inside the facility and immediately outdoors in order to evaluate OAP effectiveness. For the cannabis odor study, Geosyntec utilized the Nasal Ranger as the primary odor data collection tool. The Nasal Ranger is a standard tool to measure nuisance odor, and it is a field olfactometer that uses dilution to threshold values, D/T, to measure odor. The Nasal Ranger measures and quantifies odor strength in ambient air. Olfactometry is a widely used method, and it is the most widespread technique used in Europe for quantifying odors emitted by industrial sources. So, what does the Nasal Ranger measure? This standardized tool quantifies the perceived odor level as D/T. This is determined as the number of dilutions of air needed to make the ambient air odor just detectable. And who can use the nasal ranger? Not just anyone. Staff must be trained. Staff that pass a required odor sensitivity assessment can use the nasal ranger to measure odors in real time. The nasal ranger tool is commonly used by air quality control managers, municipalities, facility operators, and citizen groups. Why is the nasal ranger appropriate for measuring cannabis odor? It's because field olfactometry allows county staff to quantify odors in the community in real time, and so it is a direct measure of community impact. The nasal ranger works quickly, it is not expensive, and it produces repeatable results. Using the nasal ranger allows staff to respond to complaints quickly and effectively. This is the same map shown previously of operational cannabis facilities in the Carpinteria area in terms of whether neutralizing mister, carbon filter, or photocatalytic oxidation technology is utilized. Let's shift our attention now to the round colored dots, which show the locations where cannabis odor data was collected. The size and color of the dot relates to the intensity of the odor measurement. Small green dots indicate little to no odor. Lime dots indicate some odor. Yellow, orange, and red dots indicate noticeable to very strong odors. As shown, the majority of readings collected at the property lines resulted in readings of 0, 1, or 2, with some limited measurements of 4 and 7. You can see the high readings, which are red and orange dots, were collected inside active cannabis operations. This data clearly shows higher measurements were taken inside cannabis facilities, while lower measurements were taken outside at property lines, which clearly demonstrates that odor abatement technologies are operating effectively. The May and August cannabis odor study data includes records of 335 individual outdoor ambient odor measurements, which are summarized in this table. Outdoor observations indicated that 75% of the measurements were classified as no odor, which is 0 D over T, or barely noticeable, which is less than 2 D over T. 20% of the outdoor measurements were very faint, which is 2 D over T, or faint, which is 4 D over T. There were 14 individual measurements observed as 7 D over T, which is nuisance, and one single measurement observed at 15 D over T. This bar graph shows the outdoor data information from the previous slide in a different way. These are the numbers of odor data collection points for each D over T measurement. You'll notice that the majority of the measurements resulted in a 0 or 1, indicating no odor. Cannabis facilities provided access to collect cannabis odor data on-site, inside the buildings, and outside. Indoor cannabis odor data yielded the highest D over T measurements recorded, which were 60 and 30 D over T. These measurements were noted indoors where cannabis processing and highly odorous bucking activities were occurring. Directly outside of those buildings and at the property line, D over T measurements dropped to between 0 D over T and 4 D over T. These sites utilize carbon filtration in the processing buildings and a misting neutralizing agent in the cultivation greenhouses. These data indicate that OAP technology is effective in reducing nuisance odors. As discussed in the previous slide, here's a graphic presentation showing that facilities operating in compliance with their approved OAP are capable of mitigating odors. As shown by the green circles on this slide, measurements were noted indoors at 2 facilities where cannabis processing and highly odorous bucking activities were occurring. These measurements were up to 60 D over T. Outside and at the property line, D over T measurements were between 0 D over T and 2 D over T. Based upon review of D over T nuisance thresholds for other industries, as well as the odor data collected, staff recommends adoption of 7 D over T for a sustained 3-minute period at the cannabis facility property line as the cannabis nuisance odor threshold. This threshold provides clarity for P&D, facility operators, and the public to enforce the nuisances and prevent cannabis odors from being experienced in residential zones. Staff recommends the sustained 3-minute period to evaluate whether the D/T measurement is transient or may be considered an exceedance, and whether potential corrective or enforcement actions are warranted. This slide shows a table with the range of D/T measurements using the nasal ranger and their corresponding odor intensity descriptors. Please note that the threshold of 7 is identified as a nuisance, and that acceptable operating levels are identified as no odor to faint odor. The table also indicates which odor measurements are considered allowable or compliant, shown in black. Odor measurements that are considered an exceedance of the recommended threshold are shown in red. Again, the threshold of 7 D/T is considered non-compliant. As part of the odor study, other odor nuisance-causing land uses were evaluated. Odor thresholds adopted by other agencies are presented in this table on the far right of the slide. For composting, biosolids, and sludge, which are known for nuisance odors, D/T thresholds are paired with a time component to determine potential exceedances and subsequent enforcement actions. These odor thresholds and use of a time component were considered in the 7 D/T recommendation for cannabis in the coastal zone. While these thresholds are not for cannabis, they do demonstrate that use of the nasal ranger tool with D/T measurement is an industry-accepted practice for compliance of odorous activities. The City of Denver has been tackling cannabis nuisance odor issues since its legalization in 2012. Their approach to managing cannabis nuisance odors is relevant because they have the most experience regulating cannabis nuisance odor. The locations of cannabis activities, which occur indoor, are shown here with blue dots and are primarily surrounded by residentially zoned areas. Denver's cannabis odor nuisance threshold is 7 D/T, and measurements are taken with the nasal ranger. What are other jurisdictions doing for cannabis compliance and monitoring? We reviewed practices in other counties and found that many counties are using a more subjective system, relying simply on their staff's noses to assess cannabis nuisance odor without using tools. Washoe County in Nevada and Denver, Colorado use the nasal ranger. Using the nasal ranger is a more objective tool to calibrate and standardize the measurements that are collected. In order to clarify the standards for OAPs, the ordinance includes an objective cannabis odor threshold of 7 D/T measured at the property line of a commercial cannabis facility for the duration of a consecutive 3-minute period. The nasal ranger is recommended for Santa Barbara County to measure and assess cannabis nuisance odors because it's affordable and available. P&D owns one. The nasal ranger is portable and it produces repeatable dilution to threshold concentration results to measure and quantify nuisance odor objectively. 7 D/T is a commonly used nuisance odor threshold for a variety of industries and odors. The facility property line is an appropriate point for identifying odors and ensuring odors are not experienced in residential areas. The sustained 3-minute period is sufficient to classify odor as a nuisance, consistent with thresholds established for other nuisance odors. The threshold will enable staff to objectively measure cannabis odors and adequately respond to and address complaints. Per the amended ordinance, the operator would be required to implement corrective actions as determined by the department if a facility exceeds the cannabis odor threshold. Once the department evaluates nuisance odor complaints, it may require corrective actions to be implemented in response to nuisance odors. If the following complaint-related thresholds are met, the department will require a series of corrective actions until compliance is achieved. 1 is if 3 complaints are received from individuals within a 60-day period and the department determines cannabis odor measured at a property line exceeds the threshold. Or 2, complaints are received from 5 or more individuals in a 24-hour period and the department determines cannabis odor from the facility exceeds the threshold. This level of complaints will trigger the following tiered response and corrective actions. Corrective actions would be required in the following order until compliance can be demonstrated. First, the operator shall submit a written statement that verifies operational compliance with the approved OAP or actions taken to achieve operational compliance with the approved OAP. Next, the operator shall conduct diagnostic testing of the existing approved OAP equipment and submit a written statement describing the results of the testing and corrective actions taken to eliminate or reduce the cannabis-related nuisance odors. And 3, the operator shall conduct a best available control technology assessment and develop a revised OAP to be recertified by a California registered engineer or certified industrial hygienist, subject to the department's review and approval. By applying this incremental corrective action approach to nuisance odors, the department will be able to ensure operators are compliant with their OAPs. The proposed changes to the odor abatement plan section will require OAP equipment to include runtime meters, which demonstrate when odor abatement equipment is functioning, require operators to submit runtime data, and clarify that OAPs are required to be certified by a California registered engineer or certified industrial hygienist. These changes will provide tools to allow P&D compliance staff to verify compliance with OAPs. Currently, the standard condition of approval requires quarterly inspections upon installation of technology. P&D proposes to require quarterly inspections for the first year of operation and annual OAP inspections thereafter. In addition, operators will be required to provide compliance monitoring information annually or when requested by P&D. The proposed amendment streamlines the process for existing operations to revise their OAPs with improved odor control systems without the issuance of a new CDP. This will streamline the permitting process such that operators will only be required to revise their existing permit, which is a ministerial, non-appealable action. To reduce the high volume of nuisance complaints and impacts related to cannabis odor, staff recommends that the ordinance amendments become effective and applicable to all commercial cannabis facilities at the time of Coastal Commission certification. This will result in the ordinance amendments being applicable retrospectively and prospectively, as odor surveys completed by Geosyntec have demonstrated that many existing OAPs currently meet the 7 D/T threshold. Accordingly, most existing operators already have or are working toward installing odor control systems that are sufficient to comply with the proposed ordinance amendments. These amendments to the coastal zoning ordinance must be reviewed by the Planning Commission and adopted by the Board of Supervisors. Then they will be reviewed by the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission may take about 14 months to review, approve, and certify ordinance amendments. This slide shows that implementation of the new ordinance is estimated in 2026. The proposed Article 2 amendments are within the scope of the program EIR and will not alter the purpose or intent of the Article 2 cannabis regulations. The proposed Article 2 amendment affects portions of the county within the coastal zone and constitutes an amendment to the county's local coastal program and is therefore statutorily exempt pursuant to CEQA Guidelines Section 15265. Staff recommends that your commission make the required findings for approval and recommend that the board make the findings for approval. Recommend that the board determine the amendments are exempt from CEQA and the EIR constitutes adequate environmental review, and adopt a resolution recommending that the board adopt this amended ordinance. P&D staff and Geosyntec are here and available for questions, and we also have Geosyntec staff available to call in as well. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioners, at this time, does anybody have any questions of staff before I go into public comment? Mr. Cooney.
Thank you. Ms. Baylor, excellent. It's really a process to understand what you're saying and how it relates to what we've been doing in terms of enforcement over the last several years. And so what concerns me is that you put a time within which you hope to have compliance. And I thought all along we were acting to force compliance by the addition, for example, of carbon filters. And I think we've led others to believe that that's a good solution. And we attached reasonable time limits within which the carbon scrubbers are to be installed. Is that process of following up on those directions still in force, and we're just talking about something to make it more enforceable? Mr. Briggs knows.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Cooney. So yes, you are correct, and thank you for pointing that out. So as each new permit or each modified permit comes through and your commission requires additional technology to be installed for odor abatement, you are step by step and facility by facility making the issue better. Things are improving on a constant basis with each new odor abatement plan that is installed and becomes operational. So in effect, what I hear you saying is that we're kind of taking a two-pronged approach here, one being project specific and improving odor abatement plans one by one, and then also moving forward with the ordinance amendment effort that would allow staff to better enforce nuisance odor by providing ourselves with some tools and a way to measure and a more specific regimen. So yes, you are correct.
Chair and Commissioners, if I could tag on to what Mr. Briggs had talked about. There's really two issues at play. There's the type of system, which is the odor abatement system. And as Mr. Briggs indicated, over time, the commission has placed conditions of approval with timelines for those to be installed. So the permit compliance staff and the cannabis enforcement team are ensuring that those conditions are met, that the timelines are met, and the units are being installed. But today, there's really two issues. There's the type of odor abatement system, and then there's the performance measure on whatever type is installed is actually working. So that's what the objective is today with these ordinance amendments, is not to talk about the type of system that's being installed. It's really to talk about, give tools to actually monitor the conditions that were put on, that they have to install a certain type. It gives the department the ability to actually do a performance measurement aspect of it, to actually go out in the field to determine whatever type of system is being installed is actually being effective. And the way to do that is establishing an objective threshold. So there's really two things that we're talking about. There's the type of system, and then there's the way to measure whether or not that system is adequate. And that's what the department's trying to accomplish with these ordinance amendments.
Well, I'll ask you, since you were the last to speak on that, the plan is something that we can learn about and implement over time. It's going to take quite a bit of time. And our goal in case by case, where we reviewed the odor abatement plans and directed the installation of what we believe to be the best available technology. And what I'm not hearing is any situation where the 12-month period or the period in the odor abatement plan was decided and agreed to by the Planning Commission. If it wasn't implemented, is there no enforcement of those conditions?
Chair, Commissioner Cooney, so that's a separate issue. So in that scenario, where a condition of approval was placed on by the Planning Commission to install a type of system within 12 months, that is still enforceable because it's a condition of approval. So that clock starts ticking. So if they run the clock out and they haven't installed according to that condition, then that's a violation of that permit condition. And they could get enforcement, notice of violations, et cetera, until they meet that condition. I mean, it could ramp up to where it comes back to the commission for revocation because they're not meeting that condition of approval. So yes, that is enforceable. What Ms. Baylor was talking about earlier about being unenforceable is when we were getting numerous complaints of, oh, there's odor on the roadway, there's odor in my house, there's odor anywhere. What we're unable to do is actually verify where that odor is coming from. So now with what we're proposing is it allows the department to get at the property line to measure odor at a property line to say, okay, we can actually get closer to where there is an emission source. Where before, the current ordinance doesn't allow us, it doesn't give us the tools to do that. So now we can do two things. You have a condition that requires you to install X type of system within 12 months. And with this ordinance amendment, we'll actually be able to measure in an objective way whether or not that system the commission conditioned it is actually working or not. And if it isn't working, then as Ms. Baylor indicated, there's a tiered system that requires them to be responsive and make upgrades if necessary if they can't meet that threshold.
Okay, well, so, I don't want to take too much more time on my part. I'm sure the other commissioners and the public want to have comments, but we are deluged with complaints. And despite the fact that the complaints have fallen off, I think staff is correct in saying people have grown tired of the effort to put down their complaints about odor that they smell. And these new proposals are all going to be utilized in reducing the number of complaints or the odors in fact. I was hearing and concerned that all of the efforts we've done up to now with the help of neighbors to call for the best available technology are just set aside because staff is not going to enforce those at this point.
So, Chair and Commissioner Cooney, that would be an inaccurate response. So we still have compliant staff that's still enforcing the conditions of approval. So that is still ongoing, and we're still requiring people to meet those conditions of approval, which would be you have to install a certain type of system within X months. So that is still active, and staff is still currently working on that aspect. This is basically icing on top of that, is saying, hey, not only do you have to install this, we're going to be able to measure whether or not that type of system is actually working.
Oh, that's fine for now. Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Park.
You know, I admire the effort here to do something, and it reminds me of that statement that you know, sometimes the perfect can be the enemy of the good. You know, we might say we need to do this, we might do that, but I think the philosophy here is let's get a better system for processing complaints. That being said, this seems very complicated to me, and I want to feel that I've got mastery of it before I ever vote. I won't hide the ball. I think this matter ought to be continued at some point today for further hearing. I'm going to ask you two questions, though. Just right now, I want to understand better the ability or duty of staff to alter conditions. And so if you could go back to slide 31, 32, I think it is. So 32, I think. Well, where's the one that's on the a project can go to the director for a change in their okay. So, you know, my concern is that the Planning Commission hears a matter, and of course the board, if it goes that far, and we set conditions, you know, it might be carbon scrubbers or something. And then the director can approve a change that might undermine or contravene what we did. And then we never hear about it again. So I'm concerned how that works. And here I see minor change. The director may approve a minor change. What is a minor change? That's a question.
So Commissioner Park, through the chair, I'm going to start and I'll let staff indicate. So one thing, this has already been adopted in the Land Use Development Code. So these changes are already existing in the Land Use Development Code. So we made this change a year plus ago when we came through the Planning Commission to make changes to the cannabis regulations inland. So what this is, we're making those same changes in the coastal zone. In regards to your specific question is, what is staff's ability to change conditions? The original intent, or the intent is to allow more expeditious changes to improvements to the odor abatement system. I think the concern is, can an operator come in and ask for a minor change to do a reduction in odor abatement system? And that's where I'll let Mr. Briggs or Ms. Byler talk about that. The objective is to improve systems. So if an applicant came in with a request to, I want to downgrade my system, that would be a cause for concern, because this is really to help operators improve their systems in a streamlined fashion, not to undo what we've been doing with conditions of approval. So that may not be a minor change, considered a minor change to reduce their levels of service. And then
I think that's something I'm going to want to really look at that language. And I appreciate your point that, you know, maybe I should have been awake a year ago when this happened. But, you know, on the LUDC for the inland stuff, since almost none of them have odor abatement plans, they're either exempted or they just don't need them and don't have them. The action here is all in Carpinteria, which is in the coastal zone. So now is the time. Okay, well, that's something we'll address later. I'm going to have a lot of other questions. I'm going to defer them until public comment, because I'd like to see the public be able to do its comment before lunch. I'm going to ask one more question, though. Speaking for myself and perhaps other commissioners, I'm suffering a little bit of fatigue over projects where we got to do them right now. And we kind of experienced that with the housing element. I understand it. We experienced it twice last week with Sable and with Miramar. We had to do it in one day, each one of them. And I'm tired of that. And I really want to do a good job on this one. You know, I was appointed by the Board of Supervisors. I got a call on a Tuesday night in early January. Was it 2018? I got a call Tuesday night that said, "Oh, you've been approved to be a member of the Planning Commission." And I asked, maybe it was Supervisor Hartman. I said, "Well, when do I have to do that?" They said, "Tomorrow." Oh, and what's the topic? The cannabis ordinance. And I came there, and we had to do it in one day, you know, and we've been paying for it ever since. So I want to do this right. So the question for you is, if it's not even, as we heard in the director's report, capable of being heard by the board before the end of the year, is there some reason we can't continue this once at least to do a better job?
So Chair and Commissioners, that would be continuing twice, just to make that record correct. We've heard this once before on September 25th. It's continued to today. But to respond to Commissioner Park, there is no reason why we can't continue it today. I think our objective is to hear from the commissioners, hear from the public, and if there's additional information, additional topics that you would like us to bring back, then we're more than happy to do that. So, you know, I don't know if we want to do 7 hearings like the Ag Enterprise Ordinance, but I think we can slow down and take time to address any concerns that may arise based on the hearing today.
Well, thanks. I'll be quiet so we can get the public to give a chance for their comment before noon, I hope.
Okay, before I move to the right of myself, Commissioner Cooney, did you have something to add to your comment? No. Okay. Commissioner Riley.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of questions because it might help inform some of the public comment. But At the last hearing, I was really hopeful that we would do some public outreach. And I talked to Ms. Baylor about that, and she talked to management. So I'd like to hear from staff. What was the reason why you didn't want to have a single community meeting out there to get some feedback? Because for today, we have 40 letters. All of them are against this package. I mean, I feel like we haven't moved the needle in terms of community understanding. So I'd like to hear from staff why that decision was made.
Everybody's looking at me, Commissioner Bradley.
Chief.
We'll come back to that. We can come back to that question, but I think preliminarily, the decision was based on, to couple what Commissioner Park was, the items that were coming to the commission fast and furious and being able to allocate resources to appropriately have public outreach. That may be something we can consider if this item gets continued today, is having some outreach. I don't know what that would look like at this point or how we do that, but that was what led to a lot of the factors about being able to allocate sufficient resources to have additional meetings.
Okay.
I think we've been meeting like twice a week already in the last few months. So.
Okay. All right, and then the other one is fairly specific, which is the geosyntic measurements. It was over, whatever, a week-long period, and you gave us the climate data and everything. But did I understand it to be between 4 and 6 p.m.? When were they?
Mr.
measured?
Chair and Commissioner Bradley, they were between 5 a.m. and 6 p.m.
Okay, and so the nighttime, because every time I come up on 101, the nighttime's pretty intense in terms of odor smells. So why was it 5 p.m. was the end period? Or no, 7 p.m.?
6 p.m.
6 p.m.
That was just, a staff person in the field starting at 5 o'clock in the morning, taking measurements all day. At the end of the day, 6 p.m. We felt like that was a broad enough spectrum of data collection to gather what we needed.
Okay. Okay. All right, that's my only questions.
Commissioner Reed.
I planned on reserving this till later, but I will just, this time I'd like to just inform people that I had come to this meeting prepared to ask for a continuance, which I still am, but for a substantive reasoning that in reviewing the provided clinical studies and materials given in the staff report and presentation, and looking at what we received in the past, I had done some research, and I have some materials I'd like to submit for the record that could increase the knowledge, the understanding of my fellow commissioners, but also the general public. I think it should be made available to them for review prior to the next hearing that I'm asking for a continuance. I came up with these due to our somewhat torturous schedule for last week. I didn't have time to really research it after Wednesday, which is typically when our preparation begins. I only discovered these over the weekend, which was obviously too late to have them submitted and become part of the record and give a suitable time to be reviewed. So I'll come back to that after we give the people who've appeared to provide public comment an opportunity to provide their comment.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bradley, going back to your question, I was thinking about it a little bit more. I just wanted to point out that the majority of the complaints that we receive are in the morning. And obviously the weather kind of calms down overnight and becomes very still in the morning. And when we look at the time of day of our complaints, they're generally clustered in the morning. Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, I do have one question. Why is the magic number 3 minutes? Why can't it just be 1 minute?
Commissioner Chair, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Commissioner Chair, that's a great question. When we evaluated there was a table on one of the slides showing other nuisance thresholds for other types of odor-producing land uses. We noted that the time component varied dramatically, and the locations of these facilities and land uses also varied dramatically. We felt that a single minute, to your suggestion, could potentially be an acute scenario where the odor could be strong momentarily and dissipate. And we thought 3 minutes sustained would be more relevant or expressive of a true nuisance event and an exceedance. And something shorter could potentially just be a a transient moment in time.
So it's subjective.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions. Let's go to public, well, let me see, what's the time? Yeah, let's go to public comment because I know I only have 2 people. I have 2 speaker slips, so let's go to those 2 speakers, and then we're going to go to the ones that have already raised their hand before staff thing. So how many do we have on?
We only had one person raise their hand.
Okay.
We just got a second one. But.
Okay, so let's have those, I'm going to call the 2 here, and then the one that has their hand raised, then we'll go to that one. Okay, we have, I'm just going to say the first name because I can't read your last name. Derek? That's me. Why don't you come on up? And then behind Derek, we have Emiliano Campobello. Okay, and you have 3 minutes right there.
Thank you. Greetings, Chair and Board and staff and community. I'm Derek Stuckey. Cannabusters is my company and product, and I would like to speak on the topic of cannabis odor. Cannabis odor is a sticky wicket, as we all know. We've been struggling in this county for a long time over it, and numerous thousands of complaints have come in unverified or however by staff. So let's talk about subjectivity just for a moment. Measuring cannabis odor subjectively is a terrible idea, as we all know. The problem with the subjectivity of it is they all have a nose and they all have their own way. So I applaud the expense and effort and time of Geosyntec in Santa Barbara County, but I'm afraid that you're on the wrong track. Because at the end of a nasal ranger, guess what there is? It's a human nose. The same with an olfactometer, which is simply a panel of human noses. So I'm going to propose that the county consider a much more empirical approach to cannabis monitoring and cannabis odor monitoring. Cannabusters now has the ability and systems to install cannabis-specific VOC monitoring. It would look like this within the facility. There would be a monitor establishing what there is, the baseline. There would be VOC monitors strategically at the property line, which would again sniff those cannabis-specific VOCs and prove empirically, without a human nose involved, what is being produced within and at the property line. That data then would be in the hands of the operator for as long as that system is in place and can be made available to county staff as required in response to cannabis odor complaints. So that's my only claim, that I would like to see the cannabis odor monitoring move from subjectivity, i.e. olfactometers and or nasal rangers, to VOC-specific, cannabis-specific VOC monitoring, which is entirely empirical and has no regard whatsoever to a nose, and therefore provides the county and the operator a solid empirical place to stand and prove that they are doing what they're supposed to do. I would also add that Cannabusters itself is an oxidizer, it's a neutralizer, and it's a fog-based product to be sprayed outside. And our own monitoring and testing with gas chromatography, by the way, is that we eliminate 98.5% of odor in a greenhouse fan. Is my time up?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
But stay there, I have a question
Yes,
for you.
question.
Okay. And this question I have for you, it's also for Mr. Campobello, and it would be for Mr. Cram if he was here. You know, you mentioned this difference between objectivity and subjectivity.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring another IDI, availability, okay?
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that someone with a human nose isn't particularly available at 3 in the morning when a cannabis grow burps out its air.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry to use words like burp, but that's what we use in all these hearings, and we have that problem. But these what you're calling objective forms of measurement, I would presume they can run on a 24/7 basis and be there to detect things when that human operator just isn't, unless we hire somebody to have a nighttime shift at P&D, and who would want that job? Okay. Am I right?
You're correct, sir. In fact, those VOC monitors are on duty 24/7 and updating. I think the interval is 3 minutes. So every 3 minutes, there's a reading within and on the property line, and that data then is available in perpetuity for whoever needs it whenever they do.
Got it. Well, thanks.
Yes, sir.
I see no other questions. Thank you. Thank you. So our next
Thank you.
speaker. Please, just announce your name before you start speaking. and
Okay.
You have 3 minutes.
Hello, dear Planning Commissioners. It's good to see you all here again, and I'm really learning a lot, and I appreciate all of the time you all put into thinking. I appreciate the time that you all put into thinking. I have a pretty strong voice, so is this better?
That's fine.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Emiliano Campobello, and I'm here today as a citizen scientist. That's been, everybody has their own areas of specialization. Mine happens to be in air quality, air purification, and also odor reduction in technology. But I'm not here to sell you on anything. I'm just talking, I appreciated this other gentleman's comments because I'm here also to advocate for comparative testing. But a comparative testing to determine what would be the best available control technology, and this would be measuring odorous VOCs and specifically terpenes. Now, the terpenes are the most, what causes much of the odors with cannabis. And this is where concerns of workplace safety for the cannabis farm workers really comes in. See, I see this ordinance review as an opportunity to look at the best way forward, taking also into consideration our environmental concerns, carbon footprints, and workplace safety, because, odor nuisance is kind of, if we'll be real about it, a boutique problem, as bad as it can be. If we think about the hundreds of people that are laboring inside in the areas where the compounds are hundreds of times higher. I've had the opportunity to be in some of these facilities where there's hundreds of pounds of flower open being processed, and I've been able to document how high it is in there and how low it can be using an advanced PCO technology like mine or something else. But there needs to be a way of determining that. So there are established threshold levels for terpene levels, for odor recognition. And some of those terpenes like myrcene and isoprene are also listed on the Prop 65 list of cancer-causing substances. So this is where we can look at mitigating some health concerns for a whole industry of cannabis workers and deer farm workers that are also exposed to pesticides, mold, and other things at the same time while we're doing this. Also, some of these proposed carbon filter systems are requiring 480 volt energy coming in, with many units, up to almost $250,000 worth of these units per acre. Now, I've done my own comparison, and I know what my technology in my comparisons comes out to be at a quarter of the cost and energy use. There may be other great technologies out there, so I'm here to advocate for that in a really scientific way, as nasal fatigue, change of wind direction, all these things go to the subjective nature of the nasal ranger. Thank you very much. I'm here if anybody has any questions.
I see none, but thank you.
Okay, I did submit a letter, but it was too late to be in the record, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So then let's go to the gentleman or general person on the line.
So we have Mark Cram online.
Hello, can you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
I didn't get no slips. I got 2 slips. Oh, I can hear you. You can go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Mark Cram, and I'm an environmental scientist. I provided a detailed review of the proposed ordinance modifications in a filed letter, but I'll summarize a few key points today due to the time constraints. Several proposed changes to the complaint reporting form make a lot of sense. More specifically, without understanding the location and specific wind conditions that resulted in the detection, it'll be challenging to resolve the issue. And then maybe out of the expressed concerns for public safety, perhaps the county could consider implementing methods for keeping certain personal information from public release. With respect to some of the comments that were made a bit ago, the consultant report concluded that the Nasal Ranger is the most reliable and effective tool to support field detection and measurement of cannabis nuisance odors. Beyond the detection and consistency challenges associated with the Nasal Ranger, using the device to respond to complaints makes very little sense because conditions will have changed by the time an operator arrives to confirm or refute the complaint. It's therefore not the proper tool for this type of application. Given that growers and neighbors also know of the significant detection shortcomings, relying upon the Nasal Ranger to make decisions regarding fines or permit modifications or persistent complaints could subject the county and community to costly legal challenges. A superior approach would be to monitor continuously with unbiased laboratory-grade analytical equipment deployed to track select terpene concentrations from specific locations, upwind, near vents, and downwind of facilities, along with climatic data and operational information to unequivocally determine which facility is responsible for the downwind complaints. These suggestions are superior to what is being proposed, as they would empirically resolve key emission source questions, enable operational timing adjustment based on the projected weather conditions, and would save money for the growers, for Santa Barbara County, and for the community. Thank you for your attention to this matter and for agreeing to take your time to carefully consider these and other concerns.
Thank you. Could you please hold on? Commissioner Briley has a question for you.
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Dr. Cram, for your feedback, and we received your letters too. So when you're suggesting a continuous monitoring function, I mean, what is the equipment? What does that look like? Because, go ahead.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner and Commissioner Briley. Bridley, I'm sorry. It's referred to as a gas chromatograph. It's a laboratory grade instrument. I believe it was mentioned earlier by the first speaker as well. And we use an EPA approved method, and we've modified our system so with a single instrument, you can monitor from multiple locations. And so it's very effective. And we've deployed this at more than 40 projects, cannabis-related odor projects in Santa Barbara already. So we know that it works. We specify which terpenes we're looking for, and it quantifies it, and it sends all the data to the internet. And if we can integrate that data with the complaint form, and we know spatially where the sample was collected automatically, sort of like a robot, and we collaborate or correlate that with the folks that are complaining, along with sampling within some pathway, we may be able to determine, where the source is, and then instead of acting in a punitive manner, approach those folks and see if what they're doing might be improved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I do have some additional speaker slips here that were turned in before staff finished. I didn't see them. So we have Jared Ficker, followed by Anna Carrillo.
Hey, Chair Martinez and members of the commission. My name is Jared Ficker on behalf of Carp Growers. We submitted a comment letter, and I'll reiterate some of those comments briefly today. Thank you to the staff and the technical consultants, Geosyntec. Geosyntec's independent technical report and the staff report contain really an extraordinary amount of information about the state of odor and carp. It's clearly improved. The independent analysis chronicles the work, and again, the technology, the approach, this was decided independently. This was done by the county and staff using experts in odor control to decide, how do we look at this? How do we measure this? What is the current state? And it largely demonstrates that odor has been controlled consistent with the ordinance requirements to protect sensitive receptors in residentially zoned areas. So we've made an extraordinary amount of progress. This work has been comprehensive. It involved numerous inspections at all of the carp growers' facilities at really considerable cost to our members. We spent a lot of time. We've paid for the reimbursements for those visits and other things like that, and it's produced some really good information. That said, we believe the report generated by Geosyntic, it reflects the status of various odor control technologies implemented at our members' operations, and lots of ongoing work is still happening. So today I'll just comment on the 5 areas proposed in the amendment. The first being, 1, establishing an odor threshold, tools for measurement, and where to measure. The proposed amendments recommend a 7 D/T threshold at the property boundary, which appears to be fairly arbitrary. In fact, if you even look at the Nasal Ranger training documents, they talk about 15 D/T being an area of nuisance, and now we're talking about moving it up to the property boundary when we know from air dispersion modeling that this dissipates very quickly. So this needs more work. We need to understand this threshold. I think the notion of a threshold and looking at it makes great sense, but we're kind of picking some arbitrary thresholds and applying it at certain areas. And look, we got to draw a line somewhere, and we got to look at those things, but I think this needs more work. I would encourage a workshop or some other things to look at that in some detail. Finally, and perhaps the most important related to this, is that the ordinance amendments do not put in statute or in ordinance language the technical methodology for measurement. So if we're going to set standards in how we measure it, I think we have to actually put in language how that's going to be. We can't kind of change different ways of measuring something. Carp Growers has concerns that there's not been enough analysis to support essentially modifying ground rules when we have independent technical reports that want to go back retroactively and change the rules on anyone. So if we have a report saying, hey, we've got a whole bunch of big problems, that seems to justify a retroactive change, but the reports don't say that. So I think we need to do some additional work before we go back and retroactively apply solutions to problems that haven't been independently evaluated.
Thank you. So,
is that my time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The rest of my comments are in the letter. Thank you.
Ms. Carrillo, followed by Jill Stassinos.
Jill had to leave.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Anna Carrillo, and I'm representing Carpinteria Valley Association at this meeting. We like measuring the odor threshold at the property line of the cannabis site, though we're not sure about the objectiveness of using the Nasal Ranger. TUL, as the manufacturer of the Nasal Ranger, recommended that this device not be used in the field due to the sensitivity of the operator, the need to travel to the area of complaint after the complaint is filed, and the problem of wind moving the odor into areas away from the cannabis operation. We think measuring odor at the property line is a good idea. It's a first step. I remember previous planning commissioner kept remarking on that. The community of Carpinteria should not have to bear the burden of making the complaints. The study was done from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Many of the complaints occur at night when the vents are open. We feel that the Planning Commission should mandate that every cannabis grower install carbon scrubbers. And to Commissioner Cooney's question, very few, even though we've brought some appeals to the Planning Commission and then you've put into effect, put in some carbon scrubbers, there are only maybe 6 or 7 who have done it, and they're still waiting for technical advice or electrical connections. So they're very few. I mean, I was trying to find my number. I think maybe 6 or 7 have done it. Still requiring neighbors to complain is not adequate, and please don't add another tier as recommended. Residents, schools, businesses should not have to do the complaining. The onus needs to be on the operators. Enforcement needs to be tied to the annual renewal of business licenses. When business licenses are renewed, annual records of monthly property line odor thresholds need to be included, and license must not be renewed if there are problems. Operators need to notice residents, schools, businesses located within 5,000 feet of their operation when they've applied for renewal of their annual business license, so nearby residents, schools, businesses will have more of a say in the renewal of the cannabis business license. We understand that in January 2025, both the CEO's office will present amendment changes to Chapter 50 for the business license, and P&D will present amendments to the cannabis ordinance. This would be a perfect opportunity for both departments to work together to mandate odor control measures at the property line with enforcement tied to the renewal of the annual business license. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then next we have a question. Lionel Neff, followed by our last speaker would be Jules Dell.
Good day, members of the commission. Appreciate your opportunity to speak here. There's a couple things.
Could you please state your name, though, first?
Oh, my name is Lionel Neff.
Thank you.
I've lived in Carpinteria for 36 years. I've been involved with the controversy with cannabis for 7 years, since 2017, meeting at City Hall in Carpinteria.
Chair and Commissioner, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I just want to make sure are we still online? Okay, my bad. Sorry. Panic attack. It's okay. Sorry, sir. I just wanted to make sure we're being broadcasted.
Okay, fine. In observing what's going on today, there's a 400-pound gorilla in the room that we're really not addressing. And that is the type of technology that's being used, which is an aerosol, which is Ecozorb and Fogco, versus the carbon scrubbers. Now, the problem with the aerosols is we don't know what the long-term effect of them are. We're breathing this in, day out, and we don't know what they're going to do to us on a long-term basis. Whereas the scrubbers address the odor inside the building before it even escapes. The aerosols address it on the outside, and it's masking the odor. What my main objective was to actually discuss the use of the Nasal Ranger, and the standard 7/DT is scientifically flawed for a number of reasons. First, in the briefing on cannabis odor abatement plan compliance monitoring in Santa Barbara County sent from Ms. Miyasato and Director Plowman to the Board of Directors, one of the challenges identified on page 16 is that, quote, it should be noted that the use of the Nasal Ranger in the field has limitations. The manufacturer indicates that the ideal use of the Nasal Ranger is in a lab setting in which air is captured, taken back to the lab, and then subjected to the Nasal Ranger, rather than using it in the field. Due to the challenges such as nose blindness and fatigue that could affect readings. Nevertheless, the staff PowerPoint presentation for the September 25th, 2024 hearing and the maps contained therein show over 250 Nasal Ranger DT samples, all of which were taken in the field, and over 80% of which were taken outside where other factors could affect the accuracy of these measurements. This is directly contrary to the best practices established by Nasal Ranger's manufacturer. And indeed, when speaking of nose blindness, those 250 measurements were taken by only 2 individuals identified as Zoe and Dylan in the source files produced to the Coalition's Council. Over a period of only 4 days, namely May 28th, 29th, 30th, and 31st, and totaling only 34 man-hours of work. This is an average of 7.3 measurements every hour during those highly concentrated periods. This is the exact type of nose blindness that Nasal Ranger's manufacturer warns of.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
And I did give you some additional time because I know that you were interrupted in that process, but thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And then the last speaker for today, Mr. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name right, Dow?
No, yes.
Thank you. Please state your name before you speak, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Jules No. I represent Santa Barbara Coalition. We represent more than 600 individual donors, Over the years, we have spent significant private citizen dollars that frankly the county has been spending to find solutions to what by any definition is a public nuisance that the county is obligated to abate. Most recently, we had to spend our money to hire a county expert to debunk the report that our taxpayer dollars represented. I want to incorporate the reference to Dr. Cram's report that we commissioned in the letter of organization that our organization submitted. What I want to say here is, however, has less to do with the report and more to do with the community input and fairness. Mr. Lee's election was in part about cannabis. As the press has written about the district knows it is one of the reasons he garnered 14,500 votes and toppled a longtime supervisor who was part of the ad hoc committee that created what people have said has created the worst cannabis ordinance in the state. It should be his job to do what he wants to do with something neither PND nor our current supervisor has done, engage the community. In conclusion, PND is pushing this forward with the type of speed that anyone should question. Do the right thing and slow this train down. Do not allow PND or the current supervisor to disenfranchise an entire district. Elections should matter. The data produced by Geosyntec is flawed from day one. Collection of the samples, timeline of collection of the samples, and the matter in which it was collected. The time of collection based on your own documentation is flawed. We are not Colorado with a D over T over 7 in a non-urban environment in purpose-built buildings. Carpinteria is mixed-use agriculture, residential, and glass houses meant to grow other crops. Without the proper equipment, carpinteria and carpinterians will keep suffering from the smell. We ask that this is pushed to the new year so that the community has a chance to have their voices heard. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. So we'll go back to staff right now, and then we'll go back to us. Staff, do you have anything to add before we have our discussions amongst each other?
Mr. Chair, we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay. So I'll look to commissioners. Well, I'll say this. I thought I've heard from several commissioners about a continuation in regards to it, and that may be in line with figuring out in regards to when to continue this matter to and figure out a date and time, and at least provide staff some information or some requests of information that should be provided to the commissioners in the interim. I do know that personally I was thinking in regards to listening to everybody is that we have this monitoring equipment that we're talking about. Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to buy it? Who's going to maintain it? Who's going to pay for the maintenance of it? And I'd imagine that any monitoring equipment that we get, there's always the logistics of what's its lifespan. In other words, if it breaks down, are you going to be able to get the parts for it? Is it going to be a dependable product? That's just something I had in mind in regards to information for any monitoring equipment that we're considering, that that information be provided at least by staff in regards to any continuance. So I'll look to the other members.
Chair, can we take a 5-minute break real quick? So we can look at dates potentially?
Okay.
I'm
Let's
hearing
do
a
that.
continuance may be in order. Is that okay?
That's fine with me. If you're concerned about dates, then that's fine with me personally. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, so we're back, and I think we're in the last part of today's meeting, at least the last session of it, because we're talking about a continuation, or maybe I'm just jumping.
So Chair and Commissioners, we do have some dates, but we'll wait to hear from the other commissioners as far as direction to staff for when we come back, and that may help us determine some dates. To your point, Chair, we already have the Nasal Ranger, and I think Ms. Leyva was going to demonstrate it today for the commission. No, I'm joking, but we already have that system. But any other system, I think, Chair, your comments were accurate as far as any other system would come with a cost that would be passed on to the operators. So that's another factor to consider when you're looking at setting a threshold and the measurement aspect of it. But we do already have a Nasal Ranger, but we can't implement it because we don't have the standards to actually enforce it. So,
Thank you. Thank you for the information. Commissioner Reed.
Okay. I'll give you my reasoning for requesting a continuance. You know, it's obvious that foundational with our planning and development's objectives, which came down from Board of Supervisors, that they establish an objective threshold for odor, but then also identify a methodology to detect and characterize those odors. My first 10 years out of graduate school, I worked in biomaterials development and testing, and I certainly appreciate the exquisite specificity of instrumentation like gas chromatography, atomic spectrum, all the other sorts of analytical devices, because I used them, interpreted many technical papers on that, and actually wrote a couple of myself. So I appreciate that level of equipment. I could see potentially use of that to very closely define a problem after it has been identified. What we're faced with, though, is a more portable device for field determination on an as-needed basis. And you know, looking at a lot of the literature indicates the Nasal Ranger may be just that device. But here's my reservations and the reasoning. I looked at the sources cited in the staff presentation, pulled up both of those studies. Well, one of them from the European Committee on Standardization looked specifically at the EN 13725 methodology, but it deals primarily with using that combined with a system of dynamic olfactometry, which involves field collection of samples, bringing them into a controlled environment, and then having review by a panel of reviewers. Okay, not exactly simple, portable, and field-based. I looked at the other paper, much more substantial, from Atmosphere. Looked at odors emitted and ways of assessing those. Does give a nice little attaboy to the Nasal Ranger, but it's confined to about a one-paragraph reference on the second page, indicating that it and another device do have utility for field measurements. But again, they are actually dealing with, very robust sources of odor, like anaerobic digesters, runoff from hog farms, etc. So, although they do identify Nasal Ranger may be a very good device, and certainly probably for screening. But I thought that our board, the commission, the commissioners, and the general public could benefit from some more perhaps user-friendly but robust materials to help orient them to what the Nasal Ranger does, how it's used, and what its applicability may be. And I thought a great source I came up with, which you're probably very familiar with, which I would propose giving to staff, letting staff distribute them, both publish for the company, for the public prior to the next meeting, and to the commissioners. One, I think, very useful piece was your Nasal Ranger technical bulletin, which describes, the instrument, a lot of things with it, but I thought perhaps the most useful item in it was a testing algorithm, which explains just how the tests are conducted, and the methodology and it's much more sophisticated than just going out and taking a sniff and trying to characterize it like the sommelier in the wine tasting room. So I think that would be valuable, increasing understanding for us, as well as transparency to the general public in the need to use this, because what county P&D is faced with, particularly with respect to enforcement, is using perhaps not perfect technology, but technology that is available today, and today what they have is the Nasal Ranger. Plus, it's very portable. I mean, there may be some imperfect things in terms of data collection and when you show up on site, those sort of things, but I could ultimately see a system in which Nasal Ranger, I said, might be used as a screening device, and gas chromatography, other be used for more definitive characterization of the exact elements that are collected and the levels. And another item is just kind of a little short technical sheet for Nasal Ranger, in that again it talks about the device, how it's used in a more friendly format that I think members of the public would appreciate, since these measurements are going to have a profound effect on their comfort, but as well as on the ability of growers to operate in a profitable manner without never-ending complaints and that sort of thing. So the data collected is quite pivotal. And then I researched a lot of studies for applications of Nasal Ranger, and then I found a study from Texas. It's used at a Blue Ridge landfill. They use the Nasal Ranger. They characterize odors migrating from the landfill, and if you really look at their methodology, it's not unlike the process that's going to be involved every day checking emissions, odor emissions from cannabis grows. It's simple, it's straightforward, it demonstrates in a very understandable manner the logic for the setting the odor thresholds at 7 or whatever. So I think those would be useful both for the commission to look at and for the general public to look at, and obviously for those affected applicants, appellants, et cetera, to look at and comment on. I think it would just make the whole process more understandable and more transparent for the thousands of people that is going to affect. So I would be prepared to submit those to planning and have them prepared and incorporated into future discussions. So that's, I said 5 minutes, maybe I took 6, but at my basis for recommending a continuance to enable these to be distributed and included in the record.
Thank you, Commissioner Reed. Commissioner Bradley.
Okay, so I know that we want to give you direction to come back, and I'll try to be quick. There was discussion about the business license versus our Article 2 permit compliance system, and maybe I need to understand more from staff why staff is really looking for the Article 2 version versus business license, because a lot of members of the public are telling us you should actually just amend the business license because that's faster. But what I understood in reading some things from staff was that that's not really a permit compliance tool, right? So maybe you need to explain that to us before we ask you to chase after that as an alternative. So it's a question.
Is that a
but then I
question
do
now,
have
or is that a
direction.
continuance? I mean, really briefly, I mean, we can provide additional information, but Chapter 50 is not a planning regulation. That's with the county executive office right now. So just very simply, business license is about the user, and the Article 2 is about the use. So we regulate the use. And so under Article 2, which we enforce, there's standards and procedures for enforcement, and there's tools outlined under Article 2 for enforcement of the use. So the type of systems, it's already in Article 2. The measurement of the systems, whether they're effective, we're proposing that to be in Article 2. And we have the tools available to monitor and enforce against the use. Business license is about the user, the operator, the ability to have a business, not what we do is enforce on the use and how it is being operated.
Okay. Well, maybe there's some, and I'm not familiar with Article 50 as much as I should be, but, or yeah, Section 50. if there's something that brings in a non-compliant history from a user that staff can use or recommend to the fourth floor in terms of evaluating business license renewal. Maybe it's already in there and I just don't know it, but that would be something I'd be interested in having come from P&D as a link. It's just a link to that.
So, Chair and Commissioners, we could coordinate with the county executive office in regards to that potential option, but that would not be coming through the Planning Commission.
Okay.
That would be ordinance amendments through the CEO's office and straight to the board on that, Chapter 50.
Okay. Okay, so the other hit list things I had was, I really appreciate how much we've gone around the bend, because I think this ordinance was adopted kind of in a rush and not with a lot of public awareness, and we've been paying for it ever since. So now we're hearing today about, methods and measurements from Dr. Cram and the Cannabusters, which is a very tricky, cute name. I would like to see staff actually look at that again, even though you probably did it for us 3 years ago, to say why it does or does not meet the objectives that we're trying to get to, because I think that the objectives are going to change here. I am not necessarily comfortable right now with this 7 number, given that it was based in Denver and we're hearing a lot of information from the public that maybe that's not the right thing. What if we wanted to go to 3? We should understand what we're doing with that number and just anyway, so that's the question, is if you can come back with some sort of information from the CRAM method and the Cannabusters, if there's any valuation for that, and if it is that it'll cost the county another $3 million to research that or to deploy it, or the industry, then tell us that. That's the second thing. The third thing was, the vapor phase system has had a consistent "we don't like" vote. So I don't know how the permits that have already been approved with the vapor phase system, those should be sort of protected, but I'm wondering if there's any way we can figure out a way to transition them and kind of make them non-compliant after a certain number of years, so that we get rid of the vapor phase thing and we transition to charcoal filters, or whatever the BACT is. So now we know that vapor phase isn't as good as charcoal filters. I think everybody can agree to that. So what is the transition tool to get there?
So Madam Chair, sorry.
You're just practicing.
That's next year.
Yeah.
Chair and Commissioner Briley.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm listening.
It is lunch hour. We can bring some information back. I'm just going to manage expectations. We are not proposing any ordinance amendments that address type of technology. So you've heard a lot of comment today, or some comments and public comment about the type of technology. That's not what we're trying to propose. But when we come back, if the commission wants to add that to the resolution for the board to consider a type of technology, then that's within the purview of the commission to do that. But that's not what we were being directed by the board to do. We're been directed to come up with a way to measure and enforceability. So just manage expectations that we're not going to be getting a lot of information as far as the best available control technology. That's not what that's outside of what we've been directed to do. But the commission could ask the board to direct us to do that.
Okay, so that would be at the following, whenever we deliberate on the next one. Okay, and I think that's probably it. And just one last note, in the September 25th packet, we had an example of the Article 2 strikeout ordinance language. But that goes to Coastal Commission. I thought the urgency was to get this in LUDC. Remind me again why we're looking at Article 2, and that's a Coastal Commission thing.
So Chair and Commissioner Bradley, these operations are located within the coastal zone. So we're looking at amending the coastal zone, Article 2, to have these measures effective in the coastal zone where these operations are currently located in Carpinteria.
Would they be reflected in LUDC for Article 3, or maybe they're not applicable because we don't have greenhouses up there?
So Chair and Commissioner Bradley, the direction, again, I'm repeating myself, was to amend Article 2 to implement an objective standard for odor control in the coastal zone, which then requires a local coastal plan amendment that goes to Coastal Commission. The inland area, we did receive direction from the board to explore options for odor abatement systems or odor control inland. As of yet, we haven't finished that, and as we had indicated earlier, that is more challenging to come up with a response as far as outdoor grows.
Okay. All right. Okay, my last one is that I was made aware of a lawsuit that had been certified for publication. It was filed October 29th, and it has some kind of far-reaching implications in terms of easement use for cannabis grows. It's in J.C. Crandall, LLC. Are you familiar with it? Versus County of Santa Barbara. So I don't know that we need to get into this today, but it seems like this could have repercussions with how we make findings, for future cases, and that might be an Article 2 thing. So asking staff to look at that when you come back.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner Chair. We're very familiar with this opinion. It's not final yet, and there may be further litigation in that matter, but absolutely, to the extent it impacts this body's decisions going forward, our office will make sure we work with staff and advise the Commission about the ramifications of the decision.
Thank you.
That's it.
Okay, Commissioner Park?
You know, my instruction to staff is I don't want to spend all afternoon trying to divine usable instructions to staff, because I think that we can flounder on that for hours. Usually when we're doing instructions to staff, we've got particular instructions on amending an ordinance and improving something. We may have instructions to staff about specific information we want on a development review project. I don't think we're in either of those categories. I know me personally, I want to study the proposed ordinance language in detail now that I've had such a good hearing and understand what we're doing. And I want to probably meet with Mr. Campobello and Cram and others about their point of view. I want to meet with Mr. Ficker and other representatives of the industry about what's fair for the industry and so forth. Instead of talking about instructions to staff for specific substantive bits of information you might bring us at the next hearing, I'd rather talk about what's the format of the next hearing. The first letter we had in our public comment letters was from Mr. Giordano, who said there needs to be a special hearing. I heard from Mr. Ficker today that maybe we ought to have something like a workshop. I believe that was your term, and I've promoted those in the past and have participated in them. And so I want to see us move to another hearing. And if somebody has a brilliant idea or even any idea as to what the format of that should be, then now's the time. But I would like to get this done.
Commissioner Cooney?
I'm just circling back to my opening remarks. I think if I were subjected to the odor of cannabis for the last 5 years, I'd be shrugging my shoulders and saying, what have they really done to make it better for us? And what I feel is being done is the first step in another long process. And, I'd prefer to be nullifying some licenses on the basis of noncompliance, because there have been decisions where we said this has to be done. The odor has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed by carbon scrubbers very specifically. And yes, it's a separate line. I'm not going to force us to go down that line alone, but I think we are under the gun, and we need to get to another hearing, adopt a program that will move rapidly, and have some results.
Okay, so I guess this goes back to Mr. Wilson in regards to dates.
So Chair, looking at potential dates, we have next week, November 13th. Just see if you guys are paying attention. So, so Chair and Commissioners, we're looking at the projection report. We have 2 hearings in December that already have items on it. Based on the comments that we received from the commission, rolling it over to January, I don't think January 8th would be an appropriate day to do it. That's the first hearing in January. But that then we're limited again. I mean, we're looking at proposing a special hearing on January 22nd just for this item. And that is a 4th Wednesday, which we typically don't have a planning commission, so there's 5 Wednesdays in January. So that's what we're recommending, is a January 22nd that's designated just for this item. But we'd have to set a special hearing to do that. And then otherwise, it would be January 29th would be the next available.
Okay, Commissioners, so hearing the 22nd or the 29th, I can't make a motion as Chair, so I'm looking for a motion.
I'll make a motion to schedule another meeting continue this item to January 22nd.
Second.
Okay, any comment? So that'll be a special meeting.
Yeah, so Chair, to clarify the motion is that it'd be to set a special hearing on January 22nd.
For the ordinance and only this ordinance alone on the agenda.
Which is a Wednesday, right?
Correct. Okay. So with that clarification, any comments from the commissioners? Okay, let's go for a roll call.
Okay, Commissioner Reed,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney,
Aye.
Commissioner Park,
Bingo, yes.
and Chair Martinez.
Aye.
And the vote carries 5-0 to continue the meeting.
All right, thank you for today participation today, and that will conclude our meeting for today.